morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the seminar and panel discussion on wisdom, morality, and well-being in difficult times, organized by the Department of Medical Humanities of the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. My name is Santushi Amarasuriya. I'm the head of the Department of Medical Humanities, and I'm very pleased to be your host for today's event. As we all know, Sri Lanka has been through a series of challenges in the past. Yet again, the country faces very challenging times. Sri Lankans have always strived to overcome these challenges. In some instances, we have been more successful than in others. The focus of today will be to explore, discuss, and reflect about a few characteristics, strategies, and states of being which may be useful when navigating some of these challenges. But first, to inaugurate today's event traditionally, we will begin with the lighting of lamps. For the benefit of our international participants, here in Sri Lanka, we often ceremonially commence many events this way, as light is considered to be a symbol of prosperity, well-being, and abundance. It has the quality to make us see things clearly and also represents knowledge. This ceremony carries special meaning for us today. As you will notice, there are several clusters of lotus flowers on the apron of this stage. Apart from its calming beauty, what is also special about this lotus flower is that it tends to root itself in mud and is often seen growing lusciously in marshy lands. It is known to be the flower of dawn and a symbol of purity, commitment, and optimism for the future. Therefore, we believe that the lotus signifies what we are gathered here to do, to foster and grow in ourselves what is positive, healthy, and progressive as we strive to emerge from the quagmire that we are placed in. As we light these lamps, we hope to see the ensuing discussions bring enriching deliberations and reflections to light. So, to lead the lamp lighting ceremony, may I invite the Dean of our faculty, Professor Vajra H.W. Disanayake, followed by our international speakers today, Professor Eranda Jayawickreme, who will also be familiar with such lamp lighting and can guide our other international participants, Professor Melody Chao, Professor Saamdu Chetri, Dr. Jim Everett, Professor Igor Grossmann, Professor Saroj Jayasinghe, who is the founder head of the Department of Medical Humanities, who will also represent our local scholars, Mr. Bandara, our Deputy Registrar, and Mrs. Himani Rajapaksa, the Senior Assistant Purser. Apart from our speakers, we have some wisdom scholars who are present with us here today. We are very pleased to welcome to our faculty Professor Roseanne Mansukani and Professor Maria Salanga from the De La Salle University, Philippines, to our faculty. So may I now invite the Dean of our faculty, Professor Vajra H.W. Disanayake, to speak a few words.
Good morning, everyone. Wisdom enlightens is the motto of the University of Colombo. I have been a student faculty of the university since the year 1990, but I cannot recall a symposium or a conference or workshop or any other activity that I have participated in that has been dealing with wisdom, morality, and well-being in any form in that 3 decades or more in this university. So this is a very important milestone in not only the professional journey of all of you who are gathered here, but also the institutional journey of our faculty. I would like to therefore begin by congratulating Dr. Santushi Amarasuriya and Dr. Santushi Fernando for organizing this conference, and to Professor Sarojaya Singha for the guidance that he has given them, and all the international collaborators who have come from near and far to make this symposium possible. It comes at an important time as well, where the world is undergoing enormous challenges, strives in various forms. And dwelling on and deliberating on what wisdom is and how wisdom leads to morality, development of moral conduct, and how it translates into health and well-being is so very important. On Tuesday night, I had the opportunity to have dinner with our international faculty, and with some of them I had a very lively discussion on the rediscovery, as it were, of some of our ancient scriptures and what is described as wisdom, how it translates into morality, moral conduct, and how it translates in turn into health and well-being. Now that is something that we are trying to bring to the forefront through some of the work that we are doing in the faculty in the form of our meditation research group, which has now been converted to a center for meditation research. We would be starting a new course dealing with all these different aspects of well-being and how the different traditions are dealing with these issues. So in a way it might help us to rediscover some of the ancient wisdom and bring it to the forefront in modern day society and try to deal with the issues that we are facing. So the rich discourse that you are having, which we will be capturing and recording today, can translate also into some form of a monograph, which we take forward, which we publish, so that this can lead to further discussion, further debate, as well as translate into health and well-being in our day-to-day lives. So with those words, let me wish the deliberations today all the very best. I hope the participants in this symposium have a fruitful time and will not, consider this as a one-off event, but would consider this as a mode of continuing engagement with the work that our Department of Humanities is doing, our Center for Meditation Research is doing, and then we look at how we translate these to our workplaces, homes, the rest of society, and we help each other achieve what we want to, that is, face these difficult times with resilience. And if we can achieve that, that would be a definite positive outcome that we have all worked towards. So with those words, once again, thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words this morning. I wish you all the very best for the deliberations during the rest of the day. I will try to be here as long as possible and maybe go out and come in. Busy schedule today, but I will continue to interact with you in whatever form throughout the day. Thank you very much.
So let me take you through the program for today, which was shared with you a few minutes ago via WhatsApp. Each segment will focus primarily on one of the three topics of wisdom, morality, and well-being. What each of these terms represent may be familiar to some, but less familiar to others. But all in all, these are terms that we often refer to as aspired characteristics or states of being. Today, we will explore these concepts predominantly from the view of psychological conceptualizations with the aim of identifying some of the strategies and skills that we can incorporate into our daily lives. We will begin our discussions with the topic of wisdom, which will be followed by a tea break, and then we will reconvene to discuss the topics of morality and well-being. To give you adequate time to deliberate about the content, we will leave the segment for Q&A right until the end. We thank all those of you who have already posed your questions at the point of registration. We have already shared these questions with our speakers. While some of these questions will be addressed during the presentations themselves, we'll also cover as many as we can during the Q&A session as well. So let's launch into our first segment. The term wisdom is relatively familiar to us, and it is also referred to with some reverence as an aspired state or characteristic across many religious traditions. But the meaning of this word may seem a bit elusive to some and may be also influenced by one's culture. But what do scientists say about wisdom? Also, what does it mean to be able to act and think wisely within a difficult situation? To make it more clear about what we intend to talk about, we are going to spend a few minutes to view a situation where wise thinking may be beneficial. We tend to be confronted by differences of opinions and disagreements on a daily basis, and sometimes these situations lead to very explosive interactions. Also, these situations tend to be more aggravated when we are amidst difficult times. Why? Because we already feel harassed and overwhelmed by the problematic situations around us. So let's consider a situation that may seem familiar to us, especially given our country's economic crisis. What may happen if we don't try to skillfully navigate the situation? Imagine now that this stage is transformed into a workplace setting. We have Anju Premavardhana, who is a fourth-year student of drama at the University of Visual and Performing Arts, and Chaturanga Hapuarachi, who is a media specialist at the UNDP, who will take on the roles of Rasika, the team leader, and Aruni, a co-worker, who are discussing a project deadline that they are finding very difficult to meet.
This project is a make or break for our team, and it's putting a way we can't afford to fail.
I'm trying my best, Rasika. I'm putting in extra hours every day.
Your best isn't good enough, how you work harder.
I'm giving it my all, Rasika. You're not the one staying late every night.
Your all isn't good enough. The project success is on the line.
I'm already putting in my best efforts, Rasika. Just like I have in the past for this company, just letting you know. And anyway, please don't assume you're the only one working for this company, okay? And I think we should have done this differently.
What? As the team leader, it is up to me to decide how to do the job. It is up to you to work according to the plan and get the job done. I can't rely on you to agree that person.
No. See, you're not even willing to listen, man. You're impossible to work with.
What is your problem, Arun? This is your job after all.
My problem? You have no idea what's going on in my life right now, Rasika. I'm struggling financially and also with family problems. And I've been pushing through all that to meet this deadline.
Your personal problems usually getting in the way of your work anyway. My finances are in ruin. My family is falling apart. You don't hear me complaining about it at work, do you?
I have more than financial problems, Rasika. I have a child, a young one at that. And when I'm working here late at night, my child is at home, alone. And these are the problems, Rasika. You don't know, but I have to balance it all, and family.
Stop whining, Arun. We all have problems. We all have issues. I have my own issues. You don't hear me complaining about it. You just do your job.
I don't think we have the same problems, Rasika. I have my limits. I can't do it all.
Huh? You don't think I have problems? Huh? You don't think I have problems? I have issues of my own. I'm not going to let you use yours as an excuse.
You know what? I'm done. I can't keep sacrificing my well-being for a project. Especially when you don't seem to care or notice the effort I put in. I'm done.
Ari, get back here. We are done with this conversation.
So we see that there were no attempts made to de-escalate the situations by either party. But how would the situation unfold if it were to be handled differently? Let's rewind this scenario by a few minutes and see what might happen if it was dealt with differently.
This project is a make or break for our team and it's keeping a very hard.
I'm trying hard. It's just, this is taking a lot more time than I expected.
Yes, I see you are spending way too much time with that data analysis control. This should have been done ages ago.
Yes, I know. It's just, I'm struggling with this new software our client wants us to use, and it's been a real hard for me to learn on my own.
Aruni, put that data to the last 10 minutes now.
I recognize that. I was just trying to power through, not recognizing my own limit. Rasika, I know this request is coming late, but is it possible to get someone on the team who's already familiar with this? I can, of course, help them with their workload so they don't get overburdened with this.
Aruni, this is very last minute though, but we have to do this together. I can maybe ask someone to help. Okay, but I need you to promise me one thing. You need to update me as we go forward. Okay? Don't do it in the last minute. We can address this together.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is totally my fault, but I think if we can get that help, we'll be back on track.
Yeah, I'll speak to someone. You also have a chat with him and let me know.
Thank you so much.
I actually want to have a chat with you. You do?
So leaving him alone at home when I'm working late at night, it's been a real struggle for me, Rasika.
Isn't there anyone in that home that can help you?
No, my husband, he lost his job. He recently got one, but now he's working outstation. And my parents are feeble now, and I can't really afford to get outside help. So all this problem is causing a lot of stress.
Yeah, I didn't know it. But everyone has problems. Is there anything that we can do to help you?
I don't know if I'm crossing my lines. Rasika, is it what if a company offered a work from home option? That could really help with my situation a bit.
So that you can manage both your work and your childcare from home.
Yeah, I think that's possible since my child is a bit older now, and financially speaking, it will help a lot, and I'll be able to focus much better at work.
But does it mean that you want to continue to work from home?
No, of course not. I understand. It's just, I mean, what if we have the option to work from home when we don't have to attend tasks at office itself?
I thought about it, but the problem we have is people slacking off.
Is there any way to monitor work output?
I mean, there is. We can, put some checks in place. We can ask people to log in their work. I kind of wrote a proposal about this a while back, but there were some practical issues. We anyway have to seek the approval from top management if we are to go ahead with something like this. And even if we do that, we'll probably be able to work from home once a week.
Yeah.
We will have to take care of the client.
Yeah, I understand that.
Since on the topic of suggestions and changes, I actually wanted to have a chat with all our staff members and ask them whether they have any opinions to say. Do you have any more suggestions?
I don't know with the current situation if it's appropriate, so I'm.
No, go ahead.
Rasika, is it possible to expand the office staff? I mean, our current workload has become overwhelming due to being understaffed. I'm currently handling 2 to 3 projects simultaneously. So,
No, I understand expanding our staff count is a good idea, but given the current economic crisis, I don't think that's something that's possible.
yeah, that's what I thought. But I was thinking, what if we hire interns for on-the-job training to do small tasks? I mean, that would be feasible financially as well.
Actually, that's something that's worth considering.
Clearly, the interactions and outcome were very different when compared with the first instance. So, to tell us a little bit more about how this situation was handled more wisely, I'm very pleased to invite Professor Igor Grossmann, who is a world-renowned expert on wisdom and wise reasoning research. Professor Grossmann is the director of the Wisdom and Culture Lab and a professor of psychology at the University of Waterloo, Canada. So over to you, Professor Grossmann.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. This was quite a show. Thank you. Thank you so much for this beautiful introduction. I will start with a more general overview of wisdom, continuing what was mentioned earlier, and then we'll return to this drama and the scenarios that were presented, as well as the type of strategies that the actors in these scenarios used. Before we do that, let me just very briefly reiterate that the situation that we have in the world today is tricky. We have devastating natural disasters, we have geopolitical tensions within and across countries. We have had the pandemic, refugee crisis, and so on. And of course, we also have interpersonal issues that weigh on our shoulders, overlaid through those major societal issues that we may be facing. And so often in situations like that, you have this question, how can you manage uncertainty, or generally those dilemmas where you seem to be pulled in different directions, like when the supervisor needs to somehow protect his family and his company, and at the same time take care of his co-workers with dignity and respect and be considerate of them. In the same way, when you are an employee in a company, how can you ensure that you do your best while not sacrificing your health and keeping enough for other parts of your life. Often in this type of situations, you have conflicting moral standards. And to navigate these moral standards, it's not sufficient to just think more or be smarter, because intelligence, at least how it is typically defined through intelligence quotients, does not necessarily result in an unbiased solution to those type of moral dilemmas. Often smart people can be as biased, if not even more biased than others. They often can find very good reasons why they may be right, even though in reality they just are succumbing to so-called confirmation bias. Okay, maybe it's not intelligence, maybe it's just need to be more rational. At least that's what people in the West, in North America and Western Europe tend to say. Just, figure out what's the optimal solution and work towards this solution, figure out the algorithm, calculate your probability, and then you have it all solved. The problem, of course, is that in the situations like the one described to you just a few minutes ago, you don't know all the opinions and parameters of other people involved. You don't know what the optimal solution for this type of situation should be. And consequently, you may not be able to just naturally plan out some kind of a rational suggestion, doing some kind of mental calculus in your head. In addition to that, rationality often assumes that everybody is self-interested, and that is not necessarily the case. Okay, so maybe it's neither those IQ or rationality. Maybe you just need people to be more moral. But whose morality? And moreover, just telling people to be more moral doesn't really tell you when you should be applying the morality, and also under what circumstances should you be applying one moral standard over another. Often different moral virtues or different standards are in conflict. For instance, over the pandemic, in many communities, we had the conflict between pursuit of personal freedom and civic concerns. And how should you be navigating those? Both are moral standards, both are important. Which should you be pursuing? So one solution that has been suggested throughout centuries, if not millennia, is the notion of wisdom. But the issue, of course, is that, okay, maybe we can use wisdom to solve those interpersonal dilemmas and various issues. But what do we mean by that? What do we mean by wisdom? Often, when we use concepts like wisdom in psychology, we deal with so-called jingle and jangle fallacies. What that means is that you often use a single term to describe a whole range of different things that are not related to each other. Or you may be using different terms to describe the same thing, but in reality what happens is like nobody understands each other, like in this Tower of Babel, where people speak different languages and therefore the society collapses because of that. When people use different terms to mean something that is related or essentially don't come to an agreement, you cannot really build a foundation for robust scientific enterprise. You can't really learn from each other. And so at some point, several years ago, we decided to come together and figure out, well, what do wisdom scientists or people who claim to study related concepts mean when they talk about wisdom? And so my colleagues and I surveyed over 50 different groups from around the world for their working definitions of wisdom that they use in their research. And then subsequently we looked for commonalities and differences between those definitions. And so on the graph that you will see here on the right, you see the themes that appeared most frequently. So what you will notice on the top is that there's this notion of prosociality. So the orange indicates the more moral themes, like being prosocial, having some kind of moral disposition, have a sense of sympathy or maybe compassion, and that's not all, though. You see that there's this darker red, or I guess like the normal red maybe, that means that there's certain other themes that are mentioned. And I thought that there would be quite a bit of disagreement, but there's quite a bit of consistency and focus on those. Namely, most of the working definitions seem to be focusing on some form of taking different perspectives into account, considering the context of the situation, the person that you're dealing with, so-called epistemic or intellectual humility, so recognizing that your knowledge is limited and you may be fallible, and you may not know everything or how to do everything. There's also this notion of balance or dialectics, where you try to navigate different interests of different agents or people involved in a situation. And we describe them as metacognitive. By meta, we mean that it is some form of regulation of your cognitive processes, of your emotions, and of your motivations. So like thinking, about goals, and about your affective responses. That helps you to regulate how you approach the situation in front of you. Putting those, oh, by the way, just one little side note. So this type of focus on on the metacognition and on the prosocial stuff also occurred independently in another project that my colleagues and I did, where we surveyed at the beginning of the pandemic 57 of the world's leading scholars, some of most eminent scientists in social behavioral sciences around the world. And then we looked at what do they mention when they talk about type of wisdom needed to navigate the challenges ahead of us in this challenging world that we live in. And that was at the beginning of the pandemic. And what came out was very similar. What you see on this graph is this thematic analysis, where those themes that are closer to each other, they occurred more frequently in people's responses. And we did this kind of cluster analysis, identifying what are the clusters of different themes overlaid on this co-occurrence of themes. And what you see is that, again, there's this perspective taking, context awareness of the situation, so context sensitivity, social awareness. There is this focus on acknowledging uncertainty. There is this focus on balancing diverse interests. And then there's a whole range of moral themes that were also mentioned by the scholars in the wisdom field, namely focus on the shared humanity, solidarity, long-term orientation. So these themes seem to be co-occurring quite often. One thing that I would like to mention briefly before I dive more into this kind of metacognition or wise reasoning and demonstrated how it occurred in this scenario is that when we talk about morality here, and you'll hear more about it in a second from other presenters, quite often scientists, when they were surveyed about what kind of morals do you mean when you talk about wisdom, they don't necessarily mean just being nice to others. What they mean is this focus on shared humanity, pursuit of truth, and so-called a common good orientation. What is common good orientation is also this kind of amorphous term. Well, I asked that because I knew it will be amorphous. And it turns out that they meant shared humanity and also a balance of self-protection and orientation towards the well-being of others. Putting those things together, at the meeting several years ago that happened in Toronto, we came up with a model that emphasized that for a psychologically realist perspective on wisdom, where people at least agree on some fundamentals, there's still quite a bit of cultural variability and nuances, but for the common denominator model, we will be focusing on the reasoning, on this wise reasoning, where some examples thereof would be intellectual humility, adaptability to the context, consideration of different perspectives, and balance of viewpoints, but also strong emphasis that it has to be grounded in some moral concerns. So these reasoning strategies would not occur just out of thin air. And very importantly, that all of this sort of manifests, realizes in people's experiences and may realize slightly differently in different cultures. Now, one very quick thing, so why is this wise reasoning central for wisdom in general? This type of strategies that you also saw earlier are often kind of a requirement for how you would implement moral concepts. So if I was to say, under what circumstances do I need to be nice to others? Do I need to be benevolent to others? Do I need to pursue truth and be honest towards others versus not? Because there is a certain cost with always doing the same thing again and again and again. But you need to pay attention to the situation. You need to consider perspectives of others. You need to know to what extent is your knowledge about the situation limited. So this is what those wise reasoning strategies do. You also have the question about sort of like, well, how about seeing through illusions and self-deceptions? Well, again, this type of strategies try to help you to recognize what you may not know at a given moment, and may recognize how you may be deceiving yourself, as we always do in everyday life. And there is this also an evolutionary argument that in order to survive for humans over time, you needed to coordinate with others, and you needed to plan for the future. And planning for the future requires being open-minded to different perspectives, being open-minded to different ways how a situation will unfold. And coordination with others requires perspective taking and requires balancing of different interests. So again, the same type of reasoning strategies. Let me quickly return to the drama examples. So for instance, we saw some evidence of recognizing limits of one's knowledge in the second version of the drama. For instance, Aruni is saying, yes, Rasika, but it's because I'm struggling with the software the customer wants us to use. It's taking a lot of time to learn on my own. And then Aruni again reiterates after Rasika pointed out that this is something that should have maybe mentioned earlier. Yeah, I realize this now. I was trying to power through, not recognizing my limits. So there was a clear admission of limits of knowledge and one's fallibility, and a continued discussion of this for a little bit longer, as you may remember. For instance, there's another example of recognizing uncertainty and change, as well as some perspective taking, of which you saw quite a bit happening in the second scenario, but not in the first one, where Rasika is saying, also Aruni, I have noticed that you're very different from the Aruni I knew a year ago. It seems like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and so on. And then Aruni sort of elaborates on her issues that she has been facing with her family beyond the situation with which Rasika is familiar with. Or there was quite a bit of trying to figure out how to navigate the challenges in the company, in private life, or in the country in general by both parties, where Aruni would be suggesting some ways to move forward, and Rasika then sort of like tries to pull back a little bit, but then also offers something in return, comes with another suggestion, and then at some point they figure out some solution that works for both of them and work for the company. And without sort of course, giving up everything and sacrificing all there is to the benefit of the other person, they still protect their self-interest, but they also try to take care of the others. So that's literally what this balancing is about. Now, let me tell you a little bit about, at the end, why, what do we know about whether these strategies actually work? This is drama example is very nice, but this is, of course, just a demonstration. What about actual empirical evidence? I'm an experimentalist, and I try to orient myself by what science is telling us. So we have quite a bit of evidence by now showing how this type of reasoning strategies, wise reasoning in a way, expand beyond the existing paradigms about intelligence or personality. For instance, there is now evidence that this type of wise reasoning is linked to adaptive conflict resolution. You will hear a little bit more about that in the intergroup context later, but in the interpersonal domain, there is some evidence about that, as well as interpersonal well-being. There is some evidence that this type of strategies are associated, so people who are more likely to engage in them are less polarized in their opinions about various political issues. And one example that I would like to bring up at the end is the focus on various forms of prosocial behavior and prosociality. And so one example here is done with my former student and dear collaborator Justin Brienza, as well as Ramona Bobosel, who's also in Waterloo, where we looked at whether people who engage in this type of strategies are more likely to contribute more in a so-called public goods game. So with a public goods game, you're assigned you're in groups of, let's say, 3 or 4 people, and you can either contribute towards the common pool, which will then be split into equal parts towards everybody, or you can just be a free rider and not contribute, but hope that others contribute. And the idea is that to see whether people will be willing to give money, or if they will be those free riders, and giving money are the cooperators. Okay, and so the question here that we were interested in, under what circumstances would reasoning sustain or impair cooperation? And there are some different positions in philosophy. For instance, this is William James, a famous psychologist slash philosopher from North America of the 20th century, early 20th century, who talked about that you can reason by focusing on yourself, the so-called experiential I, immediate features, construe the dilemma or a type of public goods game as a zero sum. Either I win and you lose, or you win and I lose. So that's a zero sum type of thinking. And I want to protect myself and win. And the idea here could be that if you're focusing on this kind of experiential I, you would be really interested in self-protection as the more you deliberate. But James already pointed out that you can also be the observer, the me, focusing on the context, focusing on other perspectives, maybe recognize that you don't know everything. So focus maybe on virtues and ideals and interdependent goals in this relationship. And maybe I'm thinking, well, I'm a fair and a just person committed to reciprocity, so maybe I should be cooperating with others. So you'll be emphasizing the so-called transactive goals. And what we found before is that actually if you focus on this observer me, you're more likely to engage in wise reasoning. So we thought, well, that's interesting. So what happens if we ask people to deliberate experimentally, either assign them to deliberate or not, and look if they engage in wise reasoning or not as a function of deliberation, and then see if this engaging in wise reasoning is related to, how is it related to cooperation, donations in this kind of experiment. And so this is what we did. This was done in the United States. We give them this game, and then we also measure independently their wise reasoning. And we either ask them to spend some time thinking about the game, or they have to make a decision very quickly, or we don't give them those instructions. And when we look at the results here, so what you see here on the y-axis is the contribution in this game, so this degree of prosociality. And on the x-axis, you see either those who are 1 standard deviation, so high in wise reasoning, on 1 standard deviation below, so low in wise reasoning. Or for those who have no time control, or white bar are those with time delays. And you see there are very different patterns. The people who give the most money are those who give most, who cooperate most, are those who deliberate and who are engaging in wise reasoning, compared to those who do not engage in wise reasoning. So there is some evidence for prosociality. And this is not the only evidence that we found, actually. Since that study, which was done in 2017, I expanded it to, with some colleagues in Europe, to 9 European countries, where we looked at a whole range of measures of prosocial behavior, from donations in an incentivized experiment, to general donations, to charity in everyday life, to blood donations, to compliance with the pandemic guidelines to help other people, to voting in the election, to regular volunteering, or support of environmental groups. And what we find is that the more people engage in this type of wise reasoning, either in their personal life, so-called autobiographical wisdom, or there's an extra measure that we develop for specific reasoning about economic dilemmas, the more likely you are to engage in any of those processes above and beyond the existing measures. And by the way, this also holds in all of the countries except for maybe in Poland and Slovenia we didn't find such a strong relationship when this is specifically for the incentivized experiment in which people donated, gave money for energy resources in a South Asian country. So there is some evidence that I presented to you that wise reasoning seems to have some benefits above and beyond existing paradigms. And by wise reasoning, I specifically talked about this type of recognizing limits of your knowledge, intellectual humility, perspective taking, being open-minded to change and different ways how situation may unfold, or balance between different interests. I showed to you that it can be potentially experimentally varied. There is some evidence to that. But most importantly, so far I demonstrated to you that it seems to be consequential for cooperation and relational well-being. And so ultimately, what I would like to highlight, if there's one thing you want to keep in mind, is that when social scientists currently talk about wisdom, they are often, at least in the Western paradigms that I'm familiar with, in many ways heeding this classic Aristotelian idea of wisdom as an adjudicating meta-virtue, where wisdom is about figuring out how to navigate different complex situations and how to, figure out what to do when different moral standards are clashing with each other. And in this way, wisdom is not about abstract ideals of good life, nor is it about post hoc concrete solutions to specific problems, which are often hard to predict, but rather it's about the how. So the processes that afford sound judgment when facing life's challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Igor, for that brief but very comprehensive introduction of the concept of wise reasoning. So we have already explored how we could try to respond in a more helpful way in situations in which we have a conflict or disagreement with another person. But apart from such interpersonal situations, we are also sometimes placed in instances where there are conflicts between groups of people. This could be due to various reasons ranging from a competition for the same resources, or clashes in opinion, or conflicts created due to merely being different to one another. Can we use the same principles we talked about earlier when dealing with such intergroup conflict situations? The current socio-economic situation in Sri Lanka has placed many institutions and organizations in a difficult situation, leading to pay cuts, layoffs, and withdrawal of benefits. In fact, such issues are not only unique to Sri Lanka, but are being experienced the world over. So let's explore such a situation which has led to conflict between two groups, the employees and the employers. We are now going to welcome back on stage Anju and Chaturanga, but this time they're going to take on the roles of two spokespersons for these two groups, Mr. Pereira, the company boss, and Ms. Kanti, the union leader.
The economic crisis has hit us hard. Cutting the employer benefits was our last resort.
Excuses won't cut it, Mr. Pereira. Our health benefits aren't a luxury, they're a lifeline. We can't let our employees suffer.
We care about the employees, men. We care about the employees. We have to tighten our bills. Other companies are doing it too.
Oh, please don't feed me that, Mr. Pereira. Healthcare costs are rising. Some can't even afford medications or treatments. That's something we cannot accept.
We are doing everything to stay afloat. This ensures our future.
Really? I've noticed all those client dinners. Can't we cut down on extravagance other than taking away a lifeline?
The client dinners play a vital role. More clients ensure employee benefits.
We can't gamble on our health now for potential gains later. We just need to come up with a solution where we don't.
Yeah, Miss Tanti. I won't be lectured by someone who leads a bunch of crybabies always whining like children. Okay? These medical benefits that you receive them as part of this company while you are employees, and when we could provide it, we are not obligated to provide it.
Really? Name calling, Mr. Pereira? How professional of you? Maybe you should consider yourself joining the administration's fly-baby club where they act like children playing with our lives.
Bottom line is, we can't do anything about your request. The sooner you understand it, the easier. It is wasting time here.
Maybe it's time that we made you realize how serious we are of this request. A few days of not having us around will give you all the time to think.
Are you threatening to go on strike?
So this is a very challenging situation with various complexities and different layers of issues. Also, although we only heard from Mr. Pereira and Ms. Kanti, they represent two groups of people who are clashing with one another, making the negotiations far more difficult. Before we launch into a discussion about responding in situations such as this, since we don't really have a curtain call, may I invite back on stage our very talented actor and actress, Chaturanga and Anju, to come back on stage and take a bow. They both volunteered their time, and we are very, very grateful to them for bringing to life some of the concepts that we talked about, or we are going to talk about. So Anju and Chaturanga. Thank you very much. So now to tell us a little bit about wise reasoning and how it may be applied in situations where there is conflict between two groups of people, I invite Professor Melody Chao, who is an associate professor at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, whose work focuses on the uses of different conflict management practices. So over to you, Melody.
For having this wonderful play. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Department of Medical Humanities, Faculty of Medicine at University of Colombo for making this event possible. And also thanks for the sponsorship for the Templeton World Charity Foundation. In this part, we are going to explore a bit about how we manage intergroup conflicts. In the last few minutes, we saw a situation that might be very familiar to most of us. If that have not happened to you directly, maybe you might have heard that from people, relatives, or friends around, or you might have seen it in the news. This kind of situations is characterized by a very strong sense of we versus they. In this context, it's the employer versus the employee, or the manager versus the union. And in this kind of situations, we often observe strong disagreement and opinions or stance between the two parties involved. And like what we also commonly observe is that when people approach this kind of conflict situations, they oftentimes coming in this context, assuming a zero-sum mindset. Zero-sum mindset, like what Igor mentioned earlier, is about the idea that I'm going in here because I want to win. And it's about winning or losing. If I don't win, I'm going to lose. So this zero-sum mindset leads us to oftentimes escalate conflicts. And also at the same time, we also see or hear just now in the situation that it involves very strong sense of feeling and emotion on both sides. And so the question here is that when there is such a strong feeling and emotions in the parties involved, how do we resolve the conflict? Of course, the ideal situation is for both parties to really sit down and talk together. But as you see in a scenario, sometimes it could be quite hard for the party to really sit to think together, not to talk about having them listen to each other. And so what can be done in this kind of situations? So I would like to point out that when we try to manage conflict, it's like a journey. So it's not that there's a very straightforward solution that we have. Of course, all of us have our ideal in managing conflict. Our ideal is that there is a very straightforward path from conflict to resolution. And what would that path be? I think most of us would be like, well, our way is the way to go. This is straightforward, isn't it? But the problem is that when there are different parties involved, each person have their own way of doing it, it would become very hard to converge. So this is more like how it is like in reality. In reality, when there's conflict, there's no straightforward path. And sometimes we might find ourselves looping around and around, trying to talk about the issues. You feel like you keep repeating yourself, but the other person is not hearing. And so the question is, how do we bring it from conflict to resolution? Sometimes in the process, we might encounter deadlock. like in a scenario that we see. So how do we think about the possibility of resolving the deadlock and to come about considering the possibility of finding a resolution in this kind of situations? So we're going to explore a little bit in the next part. And so given that from conflict to resolution, there's no strict path, how do we go about resolving it? And imagine that in that scenario, both parties involved have very strong emotion. They feel very strongly about their positions. How do we help the party in this case? Well, sometimes, again, ideally, the party can really sit down and talk to each other, but in some cases, it seems like it might be impossible. So in some cases, it might be helpful to have a potential third party involved in helping to resolve this dispute. So one of the ways or common methods that people use in resolving conflict is mediation. So in mediation, it usually involves an independent third party who is called a mediator to help to resolve the dispute. And mediation is sometimes known as alternative dispute resolution. The idea saying that it's alternative because this comes out from the legal tradition, suggesting that mediation is an alternative way of resolving conflict, alternative to litigation. But of course, mediation can also be used to resolve other kinds of conflict that might or might not involve litigation. So in mediation, what does the mediator do? So this third party, the role is to really facilitate communications between the party involved. Because as you noticed in the very short scenario that we saw just now, the parties are not really listening to each other. They keep repeating their own stance and how they feel about the situations. But it seems that the message didn't come across. They couldn't quite hear what the other side was saying. And so the thing is, even the mediator played the role of facilitating communication between the parties. How do we link that to what we just learned about wise reasoning or wisdom? How do they connect? So in this case, what the mediator would be helpful in this context is, first of all, the mediator needs to facilitate the parties involved to engage in what we call perspective taking. So we have a P there, and we're going to put together an acronym for that. So perspective taking in this case refer to trying to help the parties involved to really listen and understand each other from the different perspective without having to agree with them. They don't have to agree with the other person's perspective, but at least get them be there and listen to the other side. Sometimes we can find it to be a very interesting process because especially if we are one of the disputants, we feel so strongly about the situations that we feel like, no, this is our way to go, this is the only way. But the reality might be that we might not have really learned about the perspective of the other side. Why are they feeling so strongly about the situations? What is it that is affecting the other side? Sometimes we might come to realize that if you put the parties together, a common reactions from the employee would be, well, we think that you're making a lot of profit and making a lot of money. Why are you, being so stingy and not giving us the benefit that we want? Why are you trying to squeeze every cent from us? So the employee can feel very strongly about that. But the reality could also be that maybe the employer could also have their own version of difficulty. Maybe they're having a very difficult time, which I'm going to visit in a minute to kind of go into a bit more about that. Oftentimes, from the employee perspective, how can it be a difficult time for employer? You have a factory, you have a company, you're earning money. How is it difficult for you? Maybe this could be a question that we can start thinking about. So the thing is that in mediation process, it allowed the party to really try to listen to the other side, to acknowledge the perspective of the other one without necessarily giving in and yielding your own situation, your positions. And so by at least hearing and trying to understand what the other side is saying, it could potentially pave a way for the parties involved to develop a common ground by pointing out the potential importance of the issues. Think about that. The fact that both sides feel so strongly about the situations, both sides have such a strong emotion in that situation is because this is an issue that is actually very important to the parties involved. If it is not important for them, why do they even need to argue? So this suggests that maybe there's something in common in the conflict. between the parties involved, that might be worth exploring. So this is perspective taking. So the mediator, first of all, need to facilitate perspective taking between the disputant. And the next step is that the mediator also needs to enable the parties to consider what we call humility, try to recognize their own limitation of the knowledge. Again, like we said very early on, oftentimes when we go into this kind of conflict situation, the mindset is win. I want to win. If I win, it means the other lose. And if the other win, it means that I lose. That's a very strong sense of win-lose. But we need to recognize that, wait a minute, maybe there's a possibility just to try to entertain the possibility that we can work together to maybe potentially create something that is a win-win situation for both of us. And so I think here it's very important to acknowledge the fact that in this situation, it's not about only competing or only cooperating. We are not saying that, oh, we should just open ourselves up and just cooperate and work with the others. I think we have to acknowledge the fact that this kind of situation is what we call a mixed motive situations, where people, of course, on the one hand, the party involved are motivated to compete in the sense that you want to fight for more for yourself. But at the same time, in order to get more for yourself, you also need to work with the other person. So there's a competition cooperation perspective in here. And at the same time, mediator also need to help the parties to really consider the observer's viewpoint, to try to look at the bigger picture of the situations, something sometimes we call going to the balcony. So you can picture yourself that you might be in a building, going up to the balcony, trying to look down from the balcony to see how is the big picture like. Is there something that I didn't notice? And so ask the question, what if there are something different? What if I have overlooked some aspects? And also it helps to explore the common goal. So going back to the classic employer-employee dilemma. So I'm a bit more familiar with the garment manufacturing industry, so I'll use that as an example. But I think it can also be applied to different kind of employer-employee dilemma. In a very classic employer-employee dilemma like we just saw, we saw two parties involved. On the one hand is the employee, the labor, they might want increase in wages, or they might want to secure the benefit, they want to improve the living, they want to improve the livelihood, they want to have a sense of security, which is, of course, very important. On the other hand, how about for the producer side, in this case, the employer side, the boss of the factory? Their concern is about the cost pressure that they have, especially in garment manufacturing industry. They would tell you, if you ask them, they would tell you that they are actually operating with a very, very thin margin. If you talk to any one of them, they would tell you that we are actually the one being squeezed in between. On the one hand, they want to have happy worker, but on the other hand, they are being squeezed because there's a very high pressure on cost, especially for garment manufacturing, because they need to have cost efficiency and competitiveness. Then the next question is, what about competitiveness? Why are they concerned? No, isn't it just about factory owner and employee? Who else could be involved in this picture? What is the big picture? If you think about that, why would the factories need to offer competitive in the pricing and have concern about the cost efficiency? Well, they have their buyers, the retailers. Usually, in this case, is the retailers from developed regions, maybe US, EU, big brand names. I'm not going to name anyone, although I have some in my mind. Some big brand names that have customer base mostly in developed regions, in Europe, in the US, different parts of the world. What are the concerns? What they are concerned is that they will think about the retail price. If the factories are charging them a higher cost, on the one hand, what they would do is that for the big brand names, the retailer, they are actually sourcing globally. They are not just sourcing from one factory from one place. They are sourcing globally in different regions, different parts of the world. So in a sense, there's a real pressure for the company to have very competitive pricing, because if the pricing is not competitive enough, they're going to go elsewhere and source in other places. But at the same time, there's also a keep and track balance in here, where the retailers, the big brand names, are also concerned about the corporate image. So they are also concerned that they don't want the customer to feel that they are sourcing from places where there is exploitation of labor. So there's some kind of check and balance process involved here. But again, as we start to see, even though this sounds like this is just an employer-employee dispute, it involves something more than that. And who else might be involved in this picture? We have very limited time here, so we could probably spend hours talking about it, but just very briefly, who are the other parties that might potentially be involved? Of course, the local authority. What are the concerns of local authority? The policy might be driven by the desire to develop the economy. Also, of course, at the same time, they want to get support from the local. They want to hear the local voices and be able to support the local voice because they also want stability. At the same time, they are also facing pressure from overseas. So there's a lot of check and balance point, a lot of factors to consider. It's not just about employer and employee just arguing against each other about how much to pay. But it's really about a big picture issue. And at the same time, who else could also be involved, adding to the complexity? The international communities are also involved in this picture. So the concern for the international communities could be about the political stance, it could be about international relations, trade preferences to different regions. The trade preferences of different regions, the trade agreement can also affect how the retailer source and how much they are willing to source from which region. So this is a very complex story. And imagine that if one component here were changed, it could have a lot of chain reactions to other components. And so as we can see with a more balcony view, bigger picture view of this scenario, what appeared to be a dilemma between employer and employee seems to be a much bigger issues that involve multiple parties. And so coming in from this perspective, maybe initially when we think about this employer-employee dilemma, it seems like there's the two parties is we versus they. We that is on the employer side, employee side is about we versus them. We want more, they want more, or they want less. It's the kind of debate that we started with. But as we start to look at this picture, it might start to make us realize that maybe it's not about we versus they in an employer-employee dilemma. Maybe it's a we and a we. We are in this together. And so the question is, when we start to realize that, well, maybe it's a we, yes, there's a we and a they, but then maybe we need to define a we in a very different manner. And depending on how we define the we versus they, it might affect the way we approach this, resolving this conflict. And so, like we said, so by having an observer viewpoint, we start to kind of help ourselves to kind of move away from this we versus they dichotomy. Maybe at the end of the day, the employer and the employee are really in it together. It's a bigger we that we are talking about here. And so once we start to realize that maybe there's a bigger we that's involved, next step is let's think about what are our common goals. How do we want to move ourselves forward from here to the future? How do you want to see things unfold? So the next step, what the mediator will need to do is to help the party to really recognize that the situation is evolving. I think Igor also mentioned about this. Is a very important part of wise reasoning is because you need to consider the fact that situations are changing. There are uncertainty. And what worked in the past might not work now at this moment. And so the question is that maybe in resolving a dispute, we need to consider the possibility that, yes, there was the past and we are in the present, but we might be building a better future together. So we need to consider what is the future that we want to envision together. And another aspect of mediation in this dispute resolution process is to search for compromises. It's about trying to integrate the different interests in the resolutions, trying to think about what is it that we try to maximize. Is it about maximizing our personal interest, we define in a very narrow manner, or are we trying to maximize the benefit for the parties involved jointly, the bigger we and us together? And so here, the role of the mediator is to really help the party to think about what is it that is involved? Are we trying to maximize our personal benefit, or is it about maximizing the joint outcome of the parties involved as a whole? Maybe by trying to maximize the joint benefit of the group as a whole, we might not be maximizing individual interests. In a sense, we might be accepting a satisfying decision, meaning that each party might not be trying to push the limit and try to get the max out of it, but to try to really find something that both parties involved are happy to live with. And so putting this together as a in the mediation process is very important for the mediator to help the parties to engage in right reasoning. The reason why I say that is that when the disputants themselves are in this conflict, they're in this very heated conflict, it might be very hard for them to really engage in the process themselves. But what a mediator could potentially help is to help the disputants involved to really engage in this process, to engage in this what we call wise reasoning process. So these are the ingredients that we would like to suggest that can potentially facilitate conflict resolution. Start with perspective taking, but here we arrange it into an acronym called HOPES, HOPES. So H is the humanity, trying to recognize one's limitation in the knowledge, observer's viewpoint, going to the balcony, perspective taking, trying to understand the other side without having to compromise your own stance. You can still hold on to the importance of the issue to you, but at least you hear what the others say and try to explore for potential compromise. And also acknowledge the fact that the situations are evolving and try to search for compromises that can help the parties involved to move forward to a better future. So with this HOPES acronym is actually coming from the wise reasoning perspective. And so with HOPES, we hope that we can help the disputants involved, in this case, employee-employee, to move from conflict to resolution. And I think it's very important to acknowledge the fact that conflict resolution is not easy. So we cannot expect a very straightforward path. We might find ourselves going around and around, maybe sometimes in circle, but eventually, if we can engage the parties involved into this, having these hopes, we might have better hope in resolving the dispute. Of course, there's no guarantee that we can always resolve all the dispute, but at least it's a process of trying to think about what are the possibilities, what are the options that we have. So mediation represents one of the potential way in resolving the dispute. So this is what I have, and thanks everyone.
Thank you very much, Melody. So now that we have got a clearer understanding of what wise reasoning means and how it may be applied in interpersonal and intergroup conflict situations, we thought we will spend a few minutes chatting about its relevance across both diverse and challenging settings. So for this discussion, we will have Professor Igor Grossmann and Professor Melody Chao. We were to have Dr. Justin Brienza from the University of Queensland to also contribute to this segment, but unfortunately his trip to Sri Lanka got cancelled in the last minute. However, Professor Grossmann and Professor Chao have worked closely with Dr. Brienza and will be very familiar with some of his work. So just give me 1 minute whilst we set up. Okay, so thank you. May I invite Igor and Melody back on stage? Okay, all right, so we are back in business. So Igor, I would like to direct my first question to you. This is actually a question that was posed by a participant. You did talk about the dimensions of wise reasoning during your presentation, but the question is, in our day-to-day lives, how can we recognize a person who actually has wisdom?
Well, that's a complicated question. I wish I had a good answer to that. The truth is that, the way how we think does not always represent how we act and how we express it. I mean, there's a hope that the person who would engage in wise reasoning, would show intellectual humility, would also express it. And if that is the case, then I guess a wise person would be the one who would show intellectual humility in challenging situations. It's a person who may be more likely to take perspectives, be more open-minded, be not only focusing on win-lose type of situation, as Melody pointed out, but, here's a but. We all know those people who are wonderful and smart and wise in some situations, and then really fail miserably at exercising wisdom in other situations. Like, raise your hand if you know somebody who is wonderful at giving a good advice, but maybe not so good at exercising wisdom in their personal life. Do you know somebody like that? So what does it tell us? It tells us it's actually very challenging. It's like, who is wise in general? It's like, well, unless you sample them in all sorts of different situations, you will not be able to find out. A better approach could be to look at, well, what are the situations in which you want to have a person who would be expressing wisdom, and look at how people act in those situations. So don't really look at like who is wise, but who is acting wisely in those instances where it matters to you. So that would be my answer to this question.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Melody, I turn to you now. And this question was specifically directed to you during registration. Your name was indicated on that question. So the question is, do you think we can prevent conflict as every big institution or the government says?
So in terms of conflict preventions, I think there are at least two kind of conflict prevention. So sometimes one type we call disintegration avoidance. Have you ever encountered situations where you feel very strongly about something, but you kind of don't want to say it because you're afraid that if you say it, what if, if it is your partner or if it is your friends, what if I say it? Maybe it would result in conflict, so we keep quiet. So because of concern about relationship, we keep quiet. But this would only work if you can keep quiet all the time. Sometimes it might happen that if you keep quiet and kind of put things under pressure and you kind of keep it under pressure and try to press it and press it, suppress it, eventually it might explode. Then the conflict might even be bigger. So this way of conflict prevention does not necessarily work. We call it superficial harmony. You're just trying to go for harmony at this moment, but you're not trying to get the result. So another approach to conflict prevention is more about going into a more deep level harmony where people would feel comfortable in talking about the differences. So we have to acknowledge the fact that unless the other person is a duplicate of you, someone else would always have something or idea or interest or opinion that might be different from what we have. So the question is, how do we resolve that? And so another approach to prevent conflict is more like we are not trying to prevent having conflicting ideas, but it's more about preventing the conflict from escalating. So one way to approach it is, I think, also demonstrated in one of the play, the second part of the first play in the Wise Reasoning, is that it's more about really talking it through, being able to exchange perspective, to understand things from the other stance, to really attain a deeper level of harmony instead of trying to suppress things at the very moment, to think more about the long term. And I think going back to the specific ways in conflict prevention, I would say that it's actually not about conflict prevention, but it's about preventing conflict escalation. Because sometimes conflict could be have some positive effect. The fact that you have conflict could be because both parties involved are feeling very strongly about something. This is an important issue, so maybe from there you can start to think about how are we going to resolve it. So it's about preventing the conflict from escalating on interpersonal level and trying to think about how can we resolve it at an early stage. Some of the institutions do have some built-in strategies for resolving conflict. It's about anticipating the potential that there will be conflict. So in some company, they do have, let's say in the HR department, that could be an ambush person that can help to resolve conflict between the employee or between employees. And also between companies in the contract, they might also involve terms that would talk about, in the case of conflict, how are we going to resolve it? So there are actually a lot of built-in mechanisms that we can consider to avoid conflict escalation, but we need to accept the fact that conflict might happen. So that's what I have.
So thank you very much, Melody. And I think you can structure an entire sort of event or just on conflict management. So thank you very much for that response. So Igor, I turn to you once again. And this question came up multiple times, and it sort of picks up on something that you did talk about in your first response. So how do you reason wisely in a situation where those around you are not wise or unwilling to reason wisely?
Well, I think the same way how you would reason wisely about any other situation that is uncertain and challenging, you just try. I mean, I guess the question is more about like, how do you navigate, if I were to reframe it, how do you navigate challenges? How do you deal with difficult situations where people may disagree with you without just parroting back what they're saying? That requires a certain sense of self-confidence, of course, and resilience, and maybe calm. It may require going on the balcony or distancing or centering, some kind of a mindful awareness to be able to maintain those type of reasoning facilities that you would have otherwise. But personally, honestly, I would not differentiate this situation from any other situation involving a challenge.
So let me just clarify that a little bit more. So I think what the participants were getting at was you attempt to deal with the situation wisely, but there is, and you try to listen to the person, try to get that person's perspective, but you know, you feel like you're not getting anywhere because that person is not like that. The person's orientation is very different. And so thinking about the dimensions of wisdom and wise reasoning, can you practice try to use some of those in dealing with such difficult situation?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good empirical question. We haven't tested that yet. My sense is that we have to be careful not to confuse the way how about the process, the how, and the outcomes. Remember, at the end I mentioned that I'm not advocating, or I think the science of wisdom sort of field advocates for defining wisdom just strictly by looking whether it got to the outcome that you wanted, because that's often very, very challenging to define. What is the outcome that I want, that other want, like who is dictating what is good in the first place? So if you're in a challenging situation involving others, you see that it's not going anywhere, you don't get the outcome that you want, but you're still engaged in the process. Well, it doesn't mean that you will that you'll be a sucker, that you will just succumb and just do whatever they want you to do. You'll be the pushover. No, you may recognize their perspectives. You may recognize what you know and don't know. You may also recognize that the alternatives that seem to be on the table are such that this person does not seem to be moving forward. And at that moment, after recognizing that in your head, like reasoning through that, you may realize that the best course of action is to disengage potentially from that situation without pursuing it further and spending energy on it. The outcome here is not necessarily directly linked to the reasoning process. Sometimes we do good things, or whatever good means, for wrong reasons. And sometimes we end up not achieving the desired result, even though we did the process the right way. I think the second one is more preferable to me than the first one. That is, when we focus about, when we talk about this type of wise reasoning, we really much more focusing on the process, and sometimes life happens, and other things, as Melody pointed out, interfere. There's a whole range of things that happen in our lives which may prevent us from getting that outcome, but that shouldn't dissuade us from pursuing the strategies as long as we think that they're the right ones.
Okay, so thank you very much. It's very much a process. Okay, so Melody, one of the participants asked, what are some techniques that have been effective for bringing an understanding between individuals with conflict among them, be it at a familiar level or a community level?
So this question if I understand correctly, it's more about how do we bring disputants together. Again, like we talked about in the presentation just now, oftentimes when the parties involved have very strong feeling, emotion about the situations, it could be very hard for them to, not to even talk to each other. They might not even want to see each other. So sometimes having a third party involved might be helpful. Depending on the regions, there are actually different mediation support to resolve disputes. Of course, if the two parties involved feel that they would be able to engage in a conversation, engage in all this wise reasoning process, they can try to resolve it, but the chances is that if they were unable to resolve it themselves, it might be helpful to consider engaging a third party, an independent third party to help to engage in dispute. It can be community level, it can be familial, it can be about neighborhood disputes. So mediation actually cover quite a wide range of conflict dispute resolutions. Yeah, so we probably another lecture on that, but I'll just end here.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. I have several more questions, but I am mindful of time and perhaps you need a bit of a break. So we will pick up on the rest of the questions during the Q&A session at the end. So let's sort of take a few minutes off and have a break. You can exit the hall from either entrance in front, and you will have some light refreshments outside. So please enjoy them. And once you are back, actually at the end of 20 minutes, I'd like you to come back in here. Please do not be reminded of school, but we will be ringing a bell for you to come back and take your place. So please do come back. And whilst you're having your refreshments, you might like to step into the green space just outside this hall. We had our medical congress last week, and we had these live painting exhibitions of a person's conceptions of what humaneness is in healthcare. And we also got opinions of what a humane doctor is. So whilst you're having a refreshment, you might enjoy seeing what some of those responses and those pieces of art look like. So thank you very much, Igor and Melody, for sharing your research and also some of your reflections and your experiences. And I do plan on picking up on the remaining questions during the Q&A session. So thank you very much. And see you back in 20 minutes when the bell rings, after the bell rings. So welcome back. We now move into the morality segment. Morality is once again another term that we tend to consider with quite a lot of reverence. On some level, we tend to have some understanding of what is right and wrong and what may be good or not. But what exactly is morality? To tell us a little bit more about the theoretical construct and some of the guiding principles that we tend to use when reasoning about whether something might be right or wrong, I call upon Dr. Jim Everett, who is an associate professor at the University of Kent. His research lies at the intersection of psychology and philosophy and focuses on moral judgment, perceptions of moral character, and the moral psychology of artificial intelligence. So over to you, Jim.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for organizing and having me here in your wonderful country. So I'm today going to be talking about my work on moral dilemmas and trust during a global health crisis, a period of adversity that the whole world faced around. And I'm going to talk about my work really from the perspective of how we think about other people based on the moral principles that they might use when navigating very difficult moral problems or moral dilemmas. So I want to start just by thinking about how we might view other people. And when we view other people, when we think about what's important as another person, we can think about various dimensions. So we can think about whether someone is warm, whether they're extroverted, chatty, friendly. We can think about whether they seem competent or intelligent. Do they seem like someone who can get things done, who's a capable person? But we can also think about them their morality. Do they seem like a good person? Do they seem like a moral person, a trustworthy person? And a whole host of research now in social psychology has shown that morality is one of the most important things that we look at when thinking about another person, that we want really a wise person to be interacting with, someone who displays good sense, good morality. And then that's more important when we're thinking about social partners than whether necessarily someone is just intelligent or whether they're sociable. We see this across a whole different range of contexts. We see this when we're thinking about who we want to be friends with, the people that we might want to work with, the people that we might want to marry, and the political leaders that we think about. And it's that I'm going to be talking about today. The key challenge, as Igor's already mentioned today, is that morality is complicated and we often face moral dilemmas. And so a lot of my research over the last 6 or 7 years has been trying to argue that person perception, how we think about others, isn't just sensitive to whether someone has moral qualities, whether they have morality, but the specific kinds of moral judgments that they make, the way that they respond to these difficult moral situations or moral dilemmas. There are many different ways that these dilemmas can come up, but the guiding period of adversity that I'm talking about today comes from the COVID-19 pandemic, a global health crisis that touched every country around the world and really brought to light some very stark moral dilemmas that I'm going to use to exemplify the tension between these different philosophical perspectives on how we think about morality. So we saw dilemmas around the world. I'm using examples mostly from Europe and the United States, where I'm most familiar with my background. But we saw these dilemmas come up, for example, when doctors were having to face decisions about who should be treated, who should be prioritized for treatment, when there simply weren't enough resources to go around. We saw this not just in healthcare resources, but in decisions of lockdown. Lockdown was a problem because when the leaders were thinking about lockdown, they were thinking, this is something that's infringing on people's rights. This is something that's causing a harm in the immediate term. I don't think anyone enjoyed lockdown. There were clearly problems associated with it, with the economy and with mental health. But they were arguing that by doing that, that was potentially for the greater good. And really what we got down to in this lockdown, in this dilemma of lockdown, was whether it's acceptable to potentially cause harm or allow harm based on the greater good. So in moral psychology, coming from experimental philosophy, we can think about differences in how people think about what we can call instrumental harm. So this is the extent to which people regard harm to innocent people as an acceptable means to achieving the greater good. That is what is more important, bringing about good consequences overall, or following established moral norms and prohibitions, for example, against killing? And the way that we've often looked at this or thought about this in moral psychology comes from this, very silly example, but one that gets at the heart of this philosophical debate. And this thought experiment asks you to imagine that you're standing under a bridge and there's a large man standing on the bridge with you. The trolley or tram, if it continues down its current tracks, will hit these 5 people. You have no way of telling those 5 people to get off the tracks. You cannot get them off. The only way that you can save those 5 people is by pushing this large man off of the bridge so that his body will stop the train, he will die, but you will have saved 5 people. And when we talk about this in moral psychology, we're talking about the extent to which they endorse instrumental harm. That is, can you cause harm to some in pursuit of a greater good, to bring about consequences, better consequences overall? And in particular, we use this to exemplify a tension between utilitarianism and deontological approaches to ethics. So utilitarianism is a very popular, very controversial theory that really dominates a lot of ethical discussion. It comes out of Victorian England, and in contrast to sort of traditional moralities at the time that posited various moral rules, utilitarians came along and said, no, there's only one moral rule. And that rule is that we always act in a way that would impartially maximize the greater good. We have to focus on the consequences of our actions, of thinking about how and when people will benefit from that. And if that means that in some cases we have to do bad things to achieve a good outcome, then that's morally acceptable. And so in this trolley dilemma case, a classic utilitarian response would be to say, yes, in this case you should push because doing so will bring about better consequences overall, whereas a more deontological rights or duty-based account would say no. Just because something maximizes good consequences, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing to do. And so a lot of my work has been focusing on not just the individual differences that are associated with these kind of decisions and the processes that might lead to them, but in particular, as I'll talk about today, how this shapes how we view other people. And so a lot of my work, starting from this very first paper we did, has shown that those people who make these utilitarian judgments, these people who say, yes, you should push, it's better to save 5 lives rather than 1, that we should maximize good consequences, can often be distrusted in social interactions. That we see their commitment to consequences as an indicator that perhaps they're less committed to social cooperation, that they're someone that can't necessarily be trusted as much. And indeed, when we saw lockdown, there was concern leveraged at political leaders in the West who endorsed utilitarian approaches to lockdown. So Donald Trump, for example, said that the coronavirus cure could not be worse than the problem itself. That is, that putting the country into a lockdown might cause more harm, and that therefore some people should be allowed to die in order to preserve the economy and the mental health of younger people. Doing this, endorsing this characteristically utilitarian view, these people were widely criticized, in line with my previous work. And so at this point, we could have said, look, utilitarian leaders who make utilitarian decisions in these moral dilemmas are going to be distrusted. But there are 2 problems with this previous work, that I've done. And the first problem is that these studies are coming out of the United Kingdom and the United States, with a couple of studies in Belgium. As we're seeing here, there's a whole world around us where people can differ quite significantly in terms of their moral judgments, the way they think about morality, and the cultural and religious traditions that are influencing how they might think about moral dilemmas. So the first thing we wanted to do is exploring how we'll judge other people, how we'll think about these wise people who might respond to moral dilemmas, is trying to take a more inclusive global approach, looking not just at participants in the US and the UK, but trying to think about the majority world, that is the people who live all around the world, the majority of the world's numerical population. The second challenge that we wanted to address is that when we're talking about utilitarianism in this way, when we're thinking about this idea that consequence is more important, the way that we often think about this in moral psychology and perhaps in philosophy too, is by thinking about cases when we cause harm to some in order to maximize the good. So pushing one person to save 5. And that's part of utilitarian philosophy and psychology, and is a part of this idea that sometimes it seems that we recognize that a wise person might have to think, at least grapple with those dilemmas, regardless of which decision they make. But there's a second part that we've argued is more fundamentally core when we're thinking about this utilitarian idea about maximizing consequences and bringing about good outcomes. And this is what we call impartial beneficence. And put simply, this is the extent to which people endorse the impartial promotion of everyone's welfare without regard to distance or personal ties. This is about expanding the moral circle beyond those close to us, beyond those in our immediate environment. It's about not privileging the self or my happiness as more important than your happiness, and really trying to take decisions away and really make decisions almost from the point of the universe. This is a characteristically utilitarian idea coming out of post-Enlightenment Victorian England, but it also shares links with religious traditions around the world. Pope Francis in the Catholic Christian tradition has said very similar things, and my understanding is that this also relates to Buddhist ideas about self-transcendence and concern for all sentient beings. And what we've actually found in some work is that while we've shown that in these sort of sacrificial trolley-style problems, killing one person to save 5, people are trusted less when they do that, we actually see, not for a friend, thinking about someone as suitable as a friend, But when we're thinking about suitability as a political leader, someone who makes these decisions prioritizing impartiality and helping everyone equally without focusing on themselves, they seem to be seen as making better political leaders. And again, at the time that we were doing this, we were seeing some outrage again in the US when Donald Trump, for example, violated this principle of impartiality by buying up stocks of drugs and preventing masks going to Canada so that they could stay in the US to protect American citizens. So we sought to test these ideas in the context of this period of adversity, this global pandemic. And to do this, we assembled an international team of many authors coming from a range of disciplines, including communication science, management, neuroscience, philosophy, economics, political science. And we assembled a team of authors from around the world. We wanted to look at testing our hypotheses that endorsing instrumental harm, this sort of it's okay to harm someone or break moral rules if that brings about better consequences, that would reduce trust. Whereas impartial beneficence, this utilitarian idea about self-sacrifice and treating everyone equally and broadening the moral circle, would increase trust in leaders. So to do this, at a period of 3 weeks in December 2020, so at least in the UK, one of the peaks of the COVID pandemic, we recruited participants from 22 countries in 6 continents. We don't have Sri Lanka, unfortunately. We do have India, we have China, South Korea, Singapore, countries in North and South America, across Europe, and in Northern Africa and South Africa. We recruited these participants representative for age and gender. So that means instead of having student participants that often in psychology tend to be, at least in the UK and the US, tend to more likely to be female and younger, we recruited a range of demographics to try and get at a more representative approach. And with the philosophers on the team and my joint philosophy training, what we did is we created dilemmas that were actually being discussed at the time in the media. That is, what are these, this global period of adversity, these specific dilemmas that are happening, how do people think about those dilemmas that are real and not, somewhat artificial questions about pushing people off bridges and so on? These more real dilemmas that a wise person would have to grapple with in this period of adversity. And so we had to ensure generalizability so that our results weren't about any one specific context. We created these different dilemmas that contrasted a characteristically utilitarian approach in both what we call instrumental harm and impartial beneficence. And so, for example, in this lockdown dilemma, the utilitarian idea is reopen the, cancel lockdown, reopen the economy, let people die because that will maximize good consequences overall. Or in contact tracing, for example, this would be that the utilitarian idea would be that we enact mandatory tracing devices so that everyone has tracking devices, whereas the deontological or non-utilitarian approach would be that these are voluntary, therefore preserving individual privacy rights. We contrasted these with impartial beneficence or impartiality, self-sacrifice dilemmas, and these really concerned, which were the real dilemma that being discussed at the time, about whether personal protective equipment and potentially medicine, which was being discussed at this time, though it never really translated eventually, once vaccines were developed, whether those should be kept within a country or whether they should be transferred wherever in the world that they would do the most good, even at the expense of one's own citizens. And so how participants saw this is they were asked to think about different people, a mayor of a major city in your region, and this was translated into all of the native or dominant languages of each country, as well as English. And so they would see this dilemma and they would either read about a person who gave a characteristically utilitarian or non-utilitarian approach in either these harm or impartiality dilemmas. For example, here, imagine the mayor of a major city is arguing we should consider lifting restrictions immediately. They say we need to think about all the consequences. Preventing deaths from COVID isn't all that matters. and continuing these will have a far worse effect on our overall well-being. Whereas the non-utilitarian or more deontological says that you shouldn't do that. As leaders, our primary duty is to protect our citizens. We must think of our responsibilities to one another and not sacrifice some in pursuit of the greater good. Whereas for the impartiality dilemmas here, for the utilitarian, the mayor is saying send it wherever it goes, whether it does the most good. COVID-19 is a global pandemic that affects all humans. We need to be impartial in how we distribute resources and send it where it can achieve the greatest good. Whereas a non-utilitarian is saying, and again, this is for each country, it's adapted, so this is how an American participant would see it. A US-made PPE should be preserved for protecting American citizens, and the mayor says we have a duty to protect our citizens first, not everyone in the world. Other countries are responsible for protecting their citizens from COVID-19. We then had participants think about how trustworthy the person is and how likely they would be to trust that person on other issues. We also created a new economic gain voting task where participants were essentially voting for a leader, but I'm not going into that just in the interest of time, and I don't want to run over, but I'm happy to talk about that at any point. And so what we see is really in line with our pre-registered predictions, that is these predictions that we raised in before and formally registered. That when it came to instrumental harm, these things like lockdown, tracing devices, those people who made the non-utilitarian response were trusted significantly more in line with our theory and the media examples that we saw. Whereas for impartial beneficence, it was the utilitarian instead that was trusted, that those leaders who endorsed sending resources around the world were seen as more trustworthy, wiser people. We saw this across all of the dilemmas. So this is for instrumental harm. You can see the exact same pattern, that this is not just about, say, responses to lockdown specifically, but it was generalizing, and it generalized too for the impartiality, self-sacrifice dilemmas. And interestingly, we also showed this across all 22 countries that we found, with one exception here for the self-report, but not for the voting task, where Israel was the only country that did not show a preference for an impartial leader. But for all of the other countries, and looking at the effects overall, what we find is that when leaders endorse instrumental harm, that is, they focused on maximizing consequences, even if that might take preference over endorsing normal rights or duties, that reduced trust in the leader, whereas thinking impartially and trying to expand the moral circle increased trust in the leader. The participants seem to view a wise political leader as someone that thinks about consequences and takes into account an element of these utilitarian ideas in these tricky moral dilemmas, but still did not override them if it caused harm. And so what this shows is that person perception, or how we think of a wise person, is not just sensitive to whether they are seen as moral, but the kinds of moral judgments that they make. And it shows that the way that leaders and other figures in authority, the way that they respond to these dilemmas has effects on trust, because it affects how they're trusted on that issue, but it also affects how they're trusted on issues that they don't actually have direct power on. And this is because we extrapolate from our position to think more generally. And so this raises concerns about individuals weighing in and having strong moral views on one issue, because it can potentially decrease trust on other issues. We've recently followed this up briefly. I'm just going to skate over this very quickly. But in this paper that's just come out 2 weeks ago, led by Clara Colombato, who's just joining the University of Waterloo in Canada, we were looking at this idea, or this problem of vaccine nationalism. So at the time that we started this project in 2021, there was increasing concern about the problem of vaccine nationalism, where some countries had a high surplus of vaccines, more than that was required to donate all their citizens, while other countries did not have enough vaccines to even begin delivering first doses. This was argued to be an ethical problem because, again, especially on utilitarian grounds, why are the rights of people or the lives of people in one country worth more than the lives of people in another country. But it was also argued to be a medical problem because as a pandemic, COVID spreads, and so it could only be addressed as a global pandemic. So we found here, just very quickly, that the same effects were found across all these studies here, thinking about vaccine redistribution, so that leaders and people who endorsed vaccine redistribution, so saying let's send it away from the UK, Australia, Canada, and America, and send it to those countries that need it more, leaders who endorsed that were seen as more trustworthy, even when it meant taking away from their own countries. But interestingly, we recruited a sample of civil servants, that is, people who are actually working in Western government, and found that they mispredicted our results, that they actually predicted that the exact opposite would happen. And this suggests that, again, how we think about other people is dependent on how they resolve these moral dilemmas. It's not enough to say that a wise person is someone who is moral, but it matters how they deal with these moral dilemmas and the principles they use. The way that leaders respond to dilemmas influences how we think about them. But those working in the government, in the West at least, sometimes misperceive how responses to dilemmas will influence perception. And perhaps they actually overestimate a norm of selfishness amongst our participants, whereas our results from the previous work and from this work suggest that perhaps actually people are taking into account more impartial global concerns than sometimes they're perhaps given credit for. And so that's the end of the thing, but one thing that I've been thinking of, and I'd love to hear from you after, perhaps in the Q&A or perhaps after the event, is I'm thinking how we can think about these dilemmas of trade-offs, consequences, and the greater good in a Sri Lankan context. I'm really interested in how these concepts like instrumental harm and impartial beneficence manifest in your culture, and whether they do. My sense as a psychologist is that these are core issues that tend to face everyone around the world. Sometimes when we want to do good, that might mean breaking a rule or not following a rule that we usually hold. And also how ideas about impartiality and universality are expressed. Again, particularly interested in the links with Buddhism here. And more generally, how can a wise person navigate moral dilemmas? And that's what I'm thinking about. Igor and Melody, and we're going to have talked about this, we're going to hear more. I'm not answering that question. I don't claim to be a wise person. I'm a psychologist and I'm studying how other people think about these wise people. But I think that this is a question that we can all grapple with, because moral dilemmas will continue to face us. We will experience them all the time, and understanding how we'll respond to those and the effects of responding to those, I think, is an important question, whichever country or culture we're coming from. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So if you mind taking a seat. So thank you very much, Dr. Jim Everett, for elucidating the principles behind the moral reasoning process and for elaborating this through some very recent studies and examples through the COVID-19 pandemic. So to extend this discussion about the practicalities of what Dr. Everett talked about, both within the Sri Lankan context and also the healthcare context, we have invited two discussants. So our first discussant is Dr. Ramila Usoof, who is a moral psychologist and a senior lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of Peradeniya. And our second discussant is Professor Panduka Karunanayake, who is a consultant physician and a professor in clinical medicine at our faculty, and also our in-house ethics expert and philosopher. So welcome to Dr. Usoof and Professor Karunanayake onto stage. So I invite Dr. Ramila Usoof to kick off the discussion and then to hand over to Professor Panduka Karunanayake.
Thank you, Santushi. Thank you, Jim. I think at a time when we're really considering whether we can actually trust our leaders, you bring the concept of trusting your leaders. You know, it's quite something that we grapple with here in Sri Lanka. So thank you for that presentation, and I think it's going to bring up a lot of interesting questions for us. I actually wanted to start with a question that had come in from the registered participants, this sort of to clear the groundwork for the discussion that we were going to have. So one of the participants asked, what's morality and what's ethics? How do you differentiate between the two?
Great, thank you. So that is, on the surface, a fairly simple question that we might expect a fairly straightforward answer. But the answer is, at least in psychology, not so much. I would say that in general, when we're talking about morality, we're talking about a level of concern higher than the self. Though when moral psychologists are talking about morality, we're tending not to put in too many content-specific ideas because there's so much disagreement, not just around the world, but within individual communities and even people that have grown up in exactly the same community about exactly what that morality looks like. I think in general, what we can think about is a broad distinction perhaps between ethics and morality, where again, there's disagreement here, but at least the way that I would see it is that ethics is more about identifying these normative standards and principles and rules. So we can talk about medical ethics and how we should act in this specific context and what are the relevant moral principles, or we can think about just war ethics. And that can be distinguished perhaps from morality, which might be seen as this more context dependent, more about the values that we hold and the way that we respond to different situations, including moral dilemmas. People would disagree on the exact words, and some people might say actually it's the other way around of how you've described it. But I would say that these seem to be the two key ideas. You've got something in morality that's about these perhaps abstract principles that we're applying to specific contexts, and there's something that seems more person dependent, or something more about how we live our life and the way that we navigate in a social world that are full of messy, unpredictable situations or moral dilemmas.
Yes, that was a great answer, Jim. I think I agree with you on that. I could draw up on a metaphor to explain that a bit further, perhaps. Nowadays, we are talking about this thing called spirituality and religion. Spirituality was, of course, initially thought of as being religious, but nowadays people take it to be a broader, wider phenomenon, which even non-religious people actually have. Even atheists or people who claim they don't have religion, they are still spiritual. So I think almost all of us are spiritual in the sense that we try to reach out to a broader goal or bigger universe or whatever. That's a bit like being moral. On the other hand, religious is more an organized set of beliefs and practices, like what you described for ethics. It's almost a bureaucratic process. Sometimes you find that ethical or ethics discussions are not ethical, in the sense that the ethics discussion asks you to do something that you don't feel is right from a moral point of view, and then that's the way ethics changes and accepts the morality and so on. So I think I agree with you. That's just a metaphorical way of explaining that further.
No, thank you. That's very helpful.
I had a question I had several questions while I was listening to you. One question was about the redistribution of vaccines, for example. So you brought up the issue of how under Donald Trump, he hoarded vaccines, masks, and all of that, and he kept it away from Canada. But then our experience in Sri Lanka was also that we got some of the best vaccines from the US, and it enabled us to vaccinate a larger portion of our population. So I was trying to think about maybe what was that impartial beneficence? How would you sort of discuss that? Or would it be the idea of charity? Because like Sri Lanka, I think charity is big in Sri Lanka, but in the US also, the US tends to be considered one of the most charitable countries. So are they looking at impartial beneficence? Because we also know that there are tensions between immigrants and citizens, for example. So how do you draw those lines for impartial beneficence? who is the everyone? And coming from a conflict setting, how does intergroup dynamics play into impartial beneficence? Yes.
Thank you. Really important question. So I would say for the first thing that impartial beneficence is a continuum, as I see it. That is that people can differ in the extent to which they're more self-focused and local focused in their moral judgments compared to the far end, which would be fully impartial, fully global. And there's a lot of in-between spaces between there that may or may not be differentially morally justifiable from a normative standpoint. And so I think that's important because that's when we're thinking about vaccines, for example, it's not that someone who rejects that concept might necessarily say we cannot help anyone in other countries. It's more about the extent to which we help our community versus another community. So while the US and indeed the UK, who is also one of the big vaccine hoarders, they sent vaccines to other countries, they just kept more vaccines than they needed in their own country still. And so I would say that sort of gets at this middle ground where it displays elements of that impartiality while still prioritizing the lives of people within that own country, I would argue, than lives globally. And in intergroup conflicts, I think this is really important. And I think part of that process of thinking about impartiality requires one to navigate this moral dilemma with many of the elements of wise reasoning that we've heard from in the sessions this morning. So things like perspective taking a moment to think about, okay, this is how I feel, but how does this person from another community with a different experience, how might they feel? We can try that perspective taking, and we can do that through a focus on shared humanity. Again, the fact that even if we have maybe disagreements in how we dress or how we talk or the language we use or the specific religious beliefs that we have a shared humanity beyond that. And I think that's what the concept of impartial beneficence, as a normative idea at least, is encouraging us to think about and focus on that core aspect that we're all humans who all have the same moral right to live. And that's at least a normative concept, though psychologically, I think very few people actually endorse that fully. It's a continuum in which we can arguably work towards, or in the language of wisdom, refine and practice that habit of becoming more impartial and global in our moral concern. Though I think very few people really act in that way consistently, though we can always try to be better.
Yeah, again, thank you. I think the concept or the aspect of impartiality in your study is very important, because to me, in fact, that is more important to me in your study than the dilemma or the dichotomy between utilitarian and non-utilitarian, because I honestly don't think that was what was the clinching point for the person to make a decision. Because people, when they do make decisions in their day-to-day lives, they don't actually analyze it so hard, so analytically, so minutely. And I mean, most of the time they don't even know the deontological and theological angles in the first place. But all of us know about fairness and justice. And that's one of the first things that we learn as children. Even primates know that, fairness and justice. So that's something that you cannot escape from when you are given a question. And I think that's the reason why this impartiality actually captures somebody, at least when answering the question. That's how I see it.
No, I agree, and I think the impartiality aspect is perhaps easier for people to grasp. I mean, indeed, we see that when we look at different moral judgments related to generally utilitarianism, people are much more able to understand and endorse this impartiality aspect than they can with this aspect of causing harm. Utilitarian philosophy as a normative ideal entails both, but psychologically it doesn't entail both. And the people who endorse the impartiality are not usually the people that also endorse causing harm to some for the greater good, that psychologically they're distinct. And yes, I think impartiality does get to this thing that's perhaps more central to being human. Yeah.
All right. So going back to the idea of leaders, the consequences you're looking at in your scenarios is generally survival, right? So if you don't vaccinate everybody, then most of them, most of the most vulnerable are going to suffer. If you're impartial, then you want everybody to survive, so equal distribution of vaccinations. But sometimes you can have sort of, what do you say, consequences that are not that clear cut. So is survival the sort of the very basic level of, the common good? Can it be that maybe a leader is looking at a sort of a level up or a competing level where you're looking at maybe the economy? Because if people lose their jobs, yes, they may survive, but they may not survive the economic downturn. And that is something that we're really grappling with because we've been hit with the COVID and then the economic crisis. We've had a political crisis in the midst. So it's all sort of competing consequences. So I'm just wondering, when a leader is making a decision, how do they navigate those competing consequences? And would it be that it's almost like, so I guess, the impartial beneficence, the sense I get is that it's almost like a trait. But when it's navigating, opposing sort of consequences, how does that work? Is it a trait? Is that, would you see one leader sort of reacting the same way with impartial beneficence? Can there be situations where, a leader can be made to make a decision, a judgment that is utilitarian, for example? What about interest? Because it's never one person making a decision. There's the party, there is the community, at least in Sri Lanka, that's what we see. You're never making a decision by yourself. There is government, there is preservation of government. So how would a leader, even if you have this trait of impartial beneficence, how would they navigate this?
No, it's a very deep question, and there's so much that we could talk about, and I'd love to talk about it in more detail. So the first thing I'd say is that I do conceptualize impartial beneficence as somewhat of a trait. That is, it's something that we can identify different people as having across situations. And we can also vary individually in the extent to which we have it. So in that sense, it's a trait. But importantly, these abstract principles do not always translate into consistent moral behavior. And I would say that typically how we think about someone who is wise is that they consistently apply these principles in these characteristics of dilemmas, and that they are perhaps more consistent or less swayed because they take this middle ground. And so when it's coming to leaders, I don't think it's, sometimes they could make a utilitarian response, sometimes they might not, but I think we can still vary in our perceptions. For example, at least for me, I see Donald Trump as, with his slogan, even America First, as a leader who's very low in that concept, whereas I can think of other leaders who might be higher in that concept, even if they don't consistently always do that thing. In terms of this difficulty of navigating the consequences, it's very difficult, and I think that's what gets at part of why we might distrust those who tend to rely too much on utilitarian principles in moral dilemmas. Because when you're saying killing is wrong, it's always wrong to kill, human lives are always ultimately valued, it's easy to understand where they're coming from, predict their outcomes in future situations. Whereas when someone says, oh, well, the consequences, it's all that matters, you run into this problem. Well, what consequences? Is we thinking about consequences of the economy and well-being? Are we thinking about consequences for life? How do we calculate these consequences? In which way are we going to predict that outcome and have a measure of success? So I think what we see is that when people are seen as relying more on these consequences, they're seen perhaps as less committed and it's a little bit more open to error. And I think psychologically, we know that when there's that room for maneuver, we can often justify things to ourselves that go against our principles. And I think that's partly what is why there's this distrust there.
Sorry. Really. Just a quick thought about, about COVID vaccine. Something that complicates the discussion further. It's just that, when it first came out, or when we were hoping for it and it was just coming out, the vaccine actually didn't have much science of efficacy behind it. And we weren't really very sure whether someone who is vaccinated would actually be okay for life, or whether you'll need boosters, etc., etc. So many questions. And in that particular scenario, the more important role for the vaccine was to achieve herd immunity as fast as possible. And that meant getting about 60 to 80% of people having immunity through the vaccine. And that wasn't just the US, it's the whole world, because the US needs to send its people to the outside world to do its commercial activities and so on. It was one of those very interesting situations where fairness and justice and those ideas sort of nudged with the other idea of self-preservation. To me, that was a very interesting situation, what COVID-19 showed us. It showed us so many lessons. This was one of them. And you might actually even argue that the leader who sent the vaccines out, sent it out because he or she knew that, okay, my 80% is done now, let's get the 80% of the other country done as well, so I can send my troops there, I can send my businessmen there, I can send my tourists there, etc., etc. I can get them to come to my country for business or tourism, etc. So it's even more complicated, actually. Yeah, so just wanted to share with that to complicate it further.
All right, thank you so much, Jim. I think we have time for questions later on, so I think you're going to get a lot. Thank you so much.
Could be discussed was merely limited by the time we provided to them, and I think the discussion just got started. But hopefully we can continue in the Q&A session. So thank you once again to Jim for that wonderful presentation, and also for our discussants, Professor Panduka Karunanayake and Dr. Ramila Usoof, for sort of picking up on some of the questions I think the audience might have. And hopefully we can pick up on these a little later. So now we switch gears a bit and move on to our third segment for today, where we focus on the topic of well-being. The term well-being covers a broad scope, being a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Even if we focus on the concept of mental well-being, it is multidimensional, involving aspects of emotional, psychological, and social well-being, and it is also influenced by one's physical well-being. We know that mental well-being of those who are placed in difficult and adverse situations can be compromised. So what about the mental well-being of the Sri Lankan population who have gone through so many adversities? How have they coped with these difficulties? So once the stage is clear, we are going to listen to what some local experts from varied disciplines had to say about this.
Sri Lanka, an enchanting land, renowned for its natural beauty and its people, famous for their warm smiles and helpful nature. But the tranquility of this beautiful island has been disrupted on many occasions. The country has suffered a series of adversities, including a prolonged ethnic conflict, unexpected natural disasters, terrorism, the COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently, an economic crisis. To understand the impact of these crises on the Sri Lankan people and how they have coped, we sought insights from scholars and professionals across various disciplines.
I'm a medical anthropologist and practitioner in the field of mental health and psychosocial support with experience of working in crisis settings in Sri Lanka. The economic crisis has brought new pressures into the lives of the majority of Sri Lankans. Many families and individuals who have been managing have now been pushed into much more precarious situations where they're struggling with new sources of difficulty like job losses or drops in income, increased cost of living, lack of adequate food or reduced access to medication. And there are also these knock-on effects of the economic issues such as increases in family tension or domestic violence, or sometimes even migration of parents or other family members for work.
I'm Shamala Kumar. I'm lecturer at the University of Peradeniya in the Faculty of Agriculture, but I'm an organizational psychologist. Our own research indicates how garment factory workers were exposed to COVID-19 in overcrowded conditions, both at work, in their hostel facilities, in the transport they were provided. We see that the effects of both the beginning with the pandemic have particularly affected women in horrendous ways. As far as the economic crisis is concerned, we know even today food security is a huge problem. Access to health is becoming a bigger problem in a country that was known for its very high, strong health indicators.
I work as a senior professor in clinical psychology at the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo. And last year, 3 of our students did a research on how the economic crisis impacted a certain group of health professionals. And when they associated these changes in the person's lifestyle with their mental health, there was an increase in depression, an increase in anxiety and stress.
So as a clinical psychologist and an associate professor at the Department of Sociology, University of Colombo, research also has shown that financial strain and deprivation can lead to an increase in the suicide rate, which is already high in Sri Lanka, and incidences of self-harm. Also, there has been a recent report by Save the Children that has indicated that children increasingly show signs of distress and withdrawal and changes in their sleep patterns and violent behavior as a result of the economic crisis.
I'm a physician who has worked in the health sector for almost 40 years as a specialist. I like to look at it from a different perspective, and that's to see how this information about the crisis spreads. And we know that it spreads like an infection, a contagion. We call it an emotional contagion. So in addition to what you feel, you are also influenced by these emotions which are spreading in society.
As a psychiatrist working in hospital and community settings, I must say the current economic situation certainly leads to intrapersonal conflict, spilling over to interpersonal conflict and difficulties in the society.
And I think what's really important to remember is that there are many families and individuals that were already vulnerable and for whom these additional challenges due to the economic crisis risk entirely overwhelming their capacity to cope, which was already stretched.
In Sri Lanka, what is increasingly evident is that they get together. In this particular situation, like the economic crisis, through absolute desperation, people got onto the streets. Everyone was affected.
I think one important factor which I have seen is how people cope with adversities, and the way they cope is the social cohesion, the sharing of problems and solutions with your network, family network, extended network, friends, and so on.
Whether it's the current economic crisis, the pandemic, the tsunami, or the war, we have always seen families and individuals being extremely proactive in trying to deal with these. They make adjustments in their daily lives to try and cope, for example, reducing the number of meals for adults, pulling children out of education, taking on additional work, and they also take extraordinary measures like migrating, leaving their families behind to pay off family debts, or giving their children in early marriage to prevent forced recruitment. And often family members prioritize addressing the most immediate needs or threats that they face, very often also at a cost to themselves or others.
Interestingly, as Sri Lankans, we use both positive and negative strategies. What I see as positive strategy is the increasing use of humor. The fact that whether in social media or in day-to-day conversation, everybody sees the dark side in a sort of humorous way, and many sort of jokes and satire comes out of the whole phenomena of distress. In a negative sense, unfortunately, we do sort of react. We are sometimes quite impulsive and emotional, and therefore it does lead to sort of impulsive acts and reactions which sometimes can be counterproductive.
So during the war, people found ways to protect their mental health. When mental health services were not available and not accessible, they sought support from the community or places of worship, for example. There was a lot of networking that took place, sharing of resources.
And there are also other kinds of efforts that are less visible and less acknowledged. For example, in the current crisis, many parents are reportedly trying to spend more time with their children, and in order to sort of buffer them emotionally with love and care, even as things get harder for their families.
Over the years, because we have had certain traumas in our life, what we have actually seen is resorting to a lot of religious activities, because reaching out for psychotherapeutic services or mental health services that may not be that huge because the entire population is affected. So we see that, the belief in the karmic frame, doing certain kind of Buddhist rituals, for instance, have been reported even in our research as well as our clinical experience with patients and people who have gone through various challenges and struggles in life.
If you listen to this video, you would have heard several of these coping strategies that have been utilized, which also link up to the strong socio-cultural features of your population. So, for example, we are a collectivist culture, and you often see how we tend to rally around to help one another, and this can help to uplift someone in distress. Similarly, our culture is rooted in some rich religious philosophies, and you often see how the population resorts to certain religious practices when attempting to cope. Also importantly, regardless of the religious lineage of some of these practices, you see how those belonging to various belief systems engage in such practices. For example, mindfulness practices have been embraced by many in the country. So with this in mind, we now invite Professor Saamdu Chetri, who will discuss well-being in relation to the development of the inner self. Professor Chetri is a professor of practice at the Shoolini University and one of the founding members of Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Center. He is affectionately referred to as the happiness guru by the BBC. So over to you, Professor Chetri.
This unspoken truth that I'm going to, or unproven truth that I'm going to share with you, I am actually very nervous. The gentleman sitting next to me is timekeeping, and I'm never used to timekeeping. So please forgive me. We will, after the mindfulness practice, you can start the timekeeping. Thank you. So before I begin my talk, shall we all sit comfortably, close our eyes, and listen to the bell and to me. Please sit comfortably. Put your right hand on your chest, where the heart is. Put your left hand on the navel, center of your stomach, and just start to breathe in and out and feel the movement of your body as you breathe in and breathe out. Feel the chest expand as you breathe in, stomach rise. As you gently breathe out, feel the chest fall, stomach reduce. When you have found that rhythm of breathing in, feeling the heart throb, stomach rise, put a word, calm and happy. So in breath, feel the heart expand, chest expand, heartbeat. Say calm. As you breathe out, say happy. Continue to flow with your breath in. Feel the movement of your body. Say calm in your mind and feel it. Slowly breathe out. Say happy and feel that. Gently bring your awareness to your center of your palms. If they are open upwards, feel the tremendous amount of energy percolating through the center of your palms. You can bring them down on your lap and feel that. And slowly pick your hands together to rub them. And when they're warm, you can put them against your eyes and gently begin to open your eyes, hold it halfway for a little while, and then completely open when you are ready. Open it filled with love and compassion. Thank you so much. It was very short, actually. I don't know if it brought any effect to you. Well, this is something about that, I would like to connect happiness and mindfulness together to see where we go from here. So Brickman in 1978 did a research to see what happens if somebody got lottery and if somebody met with an accident. So after that, a lot of studies have been done, research has been done, and it's found out that everything is so momentary until it finds a space and everything goes back to where it started. Even people who have earned millions are perked with happiness for that particular moment of time, and they naturally go back to where they started with, maybe with little changes. And people who have met with an accident, lost their limbs, are sad at that particular period of time, and they go back to the same state of mind that they were in. So nothing is permanent. It's like a swing. All that sufferance we saw has slowly over the time evolved. Time does help us, but like with we heard, what are those things that can be done to avoid the pitfalls. With this, let us try and understand what happiness really is. Of course, there is no universal definition of happiness, because happiness may mean very different to different people. But let me just think about what Aristotle said. He said, happiness is the ultimate purpose of life. If you read Confucius, he says, someone who keeps changing according to the changes is happy. If you listen to the quotes of Mahatma Gandhi, he says, what you think, what you say, and what you do, if they are in synchronicity or in harmony, you are happy. You listen to Dalai Lama, he says, happiness is not ready-made, it comes with your action. And what did Buddha say over 2,500 years ago is, there is no way to happiness, or he said, Anand, the word that he used. If we loosely translate into happiness, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. So ultimately, I think it is, everything is in our process. How do we prepare our processes in our journey of life that can decide how much happy or unhappy we can be. If you look into the genetic sciences, I'm sure you all know, Sonia Limbersmisky said that 50% of our genetics are, happiness is genetic, 40% is environmental, and 10% is from within. If you read Bruce H. Lipton, the most recent genetic scientist, he says that everything can be trained. So which means even if you come with 50% of happiness, the other 50% can be trained. Your genes can be changed to epigenesis, and you can always become happy. So what are the practices then to be happy? We can talk about that a little later. We also have this concept of gross national happiness in Bhutan, and they defined a little differently. They say that happiness is not fleeting, momentary, feel-good moods. It is to serve others, live in harmony with nature, and realize human potential. So we talk about development of whatever kind, it's individual or the community or the state. We talk about development with values, and values have been beautifully connected with kindness, equality, and humanity. So that's what we just found when people came together to serve each other, when people started to understand the relationship factor within this environment, they started to help each other. Of course, I won't talk on the neuroscience basis, science basis, but there is enough talked about it, like the dopamine, serotonin. I call that the dose of happiness, because if you align them, like if you bring dopamine, then oxytocin, then serotonin and endorphin, the first words form into dose. So I call that in 2016 when I was invited in Miami to give a talk on happiness, I call that dose of happiness. And how do you generate this dose of happiness? There's also ways for it, which we will try and cover a little later. Of course, you hear Seligman talking about Parma as a model towards your achievement and happiness. We will not go deep in that. But what are the effects of happiness? If you try to see the effects of happiness, we realize it's research that happy people are naturally or generally very successful. They are calm, they are much more concentrative, they are focused, they are much more social, they are self-aware, they are self-managing, highly motivated to serve others, to be with others. So there's so much good qualities about being happy. So why not be happy then? Because if everything is in happiness, then why don't we try to get into the concept of happiness? And it has been talked in the discussion here, karmic, acceptance, letting go, some of the beautiful mantras that we can all imbibe to learn to live a happier life, a better life. And then what happens is there's absence of happiness. Then we become forgetful, meaning that we start to live in the past or in the future. We are not present, And when you are not present, you actually are unhappy. Let me just try to show you what I mean with this. Maybe draw something to explain myself a little better. Okay, if this is the waves on the ocean, we see iceberg like this. Okay, that's it. Now what we're talking about is human beings. If we consider this, 5% of our conscious mind is above the waters, 95% is below the waters. Now what does this ice below the water content of? If you look into the quantum physics, we realize, I say this as WAR, W-A-R, it's willingness, acceptance and reasoning, which is in really the central part before you start the positive vibration. All down here is shame, guilt, forgive me for my handwriting, anger, hatred, all these negativities. And where are they resting in terms of our consciousness is right here. Now, if we are loaded with this, definitely we will have a little bit out of the water, the rest is in the water. So all the negative, the poisons of mind are all loaded here. And we are always running behind something, so all the materialistic thoughts and the future thoughts are there. I'm not saying that you should not vision. You should vision your life, you should vision your journey. You must do that. Then you start to plan. But living in that, you are not going to get where you want to be. If you don't walk on the plans, don't follow the process to get there. So unless and until we do away with this, we will only be using 5% of our conscious mind, and the rest will be used, as it is called by the psychologists, the autopiloting. We'll be doing everything that's learned right from our childhood, or in fact, even from mother's womb onwards. This is what is going to happen with all of us. So to do away, to have more conscious above the water, we need to release this into the water. And how do you do that? Maybe we will try and find some solution to it. Let's continue. So, let me just finish this. So we are attached to greed so much. Give you an example. If you look at the monkey catchers, what they do, they make two little holes on the top of the coconut, and then they tie to a tree. On one side, they open a little hole where monkey's hand can go in. They put beautiful, tasty fruits for monkeys in there and tie it to a tree. And the monkey sees it, goes, puts his hand inside, holds on to the fruit and can't come out anymore, stuck totally. And it struggles there so hard until the hunter comes, covers the monkey and takes away the monkey. All that monkey had to do was release its hand and run away. So sometimes greed can tie us down so badly, and we need to really question ourselves, whatever we do. One little example, if we have a lot of money, we go around the town, we find beautiful things, we want to buy it, but do you ever ask, is that required? If I bought this, what is the implication that is, what is the effect, the butterfly effect that's having on this? For example, if you buy clothes, factories will produce more. Factories will pressurize the cotton growers to grow more cotton. And today we live with BT cotton, and the cotton growers throw so much of chemicals into the soil that the soil is dead. Where the food is grown, the chemical comes back to us. So by one little action that we take, we make a whole movement effect within our planet. Divide self with self. I'll tell you a short story on this. A king had 4 wives, and he loved his 4th wife so dearly. Whatever she asked, he bought and gave her. He also loved his 2nd wife, but had little interaction. Whenever he felt a little lonely, wanted some advice, he would go to her. He also loved his second wife, but there he only went to find meaningful relationship with how to progress in his business life. He never thought about his first wife. It's time for him to die, and then he thought of his fourth wife, the most that he loved, and asked her, "Can you come with me to the grave or to the cremation?" And she said, "No, the moment you die, I go away with someone else." The second wife, the third wife said, "We are with you in your dying bed, but we can't go further than that." The second wife said that we will come as far as your cremation is. And the first wife comes running to him saying, "I'll go with you, I'll go with you." The first wife happens to be his soul. The fourth wife happens to be his garments, ornaments, clothes. The second wife happens to be his family relationship. And the third wife is relation, second wife is friends. So what we forget often is our inner core, our inner self. How do we arise that? And if you look into the legacy, what is the legacy that we need to leave behind as human beings is, the spiritual need of the spirituality is to leave a legacy behind. And unless we have our conscience right, we can do nothing. Divide with others. We are from the same globe with same material built. There's no difference actually. That's what I was trying to prove the other day in the conference, that we are built up of 5 elements, but what makes us different? Another question. But we divide. We say, "Oh, that is this, that's poor, I'm rich." There's so much of separation and division among we human beings. This is another sufferance we have. Unless we eliminate this and try to understand the interdependence that we live in this globe, we will always suffer. Divide self with the environment. We know that there's a therapy in the West called the cow therapy. If you are depressed, anxious, you go and hug the cow. Now, in India, Hindus have been saying cows are of mothers. If you just connect genetically, we have 88% of cow genes in us. So the whole environment that we talk about, 70% of banana genes, you name anything, quarter of rice genes, all these are related with us. So if we do away with environment, kill this beautiful environment that I read on the news that Sri Lanka, has 70% of land covered with forest. Now, if you mess with this forest, you are slowly messing with your own self, with a lot of other effects that's going to come. So the challenges of unhappiness is we know that we can never be ourselves. We get depressed, mentally sick. We will never be self-aware. Our social, emotional intelligence will drop down. And also the students will face a big problem because they will not know what to do next because of this concept of being unhappy. The challenges are too many. Let me not go on to this. I have to be careful with the time. So the key to happiness, I call this mindfulness the seed to happiness, because I know if we are mindful, we do a lot of good things because we are grounded. We are aware of what is happening around us. We become aware. And as I told you, the concept of happiness is to serve others, live in harmony with nature, and realize human potentials or human wisdom so that we can be of use to others and the self. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness, I know you all know, is simply, we say, living in the present moment. Are we not living in the present moment? We are. But the concept here is your mind with your body? Are you together? And if you are not, if you are thinking about yesterday, tomorrow, you're not present. That means when you're not present, you're not aware of what is happening around. And the whole idea of mindfulness is to be aware completely where you are, even when you're brushing your teeth, eating your food, walking down the stairs, you need to be mindful. So mindfulness, when you enhance your journey of mindfulness, what happens is you eliminate the 95% of your autopiloting subconscious, and you are going to get your conscious mind working better and better. So mindfulness is not something that people often associate with meditation. Meditation is a small part of mindfulness. Mindfulness and meditation are connected, interconnected, interrelated, because when you practice sitting meditation, you are kind of trying to ground yourself with yourself. In mindfulness, what happens is that if you're aware, right from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go back to the bed, if you're aware of every breathing movement, you are also meditating. Because what is meditation? Meditation is to connect your breath, your mind, your body together, your five senses together. And when you're aware, then you're connecting your five senses together. Because if you're walking down with mindfulness down the stairs here, your mind, your body is focused on the stairs. You're connected. If you are eating your food and you're saying thank you, multiverse, that the sun, the earth, the rain and everyone, and the hard and loving work of farmers and all involved until the food is on my table. When you are grateful like this, what's happening? You're connecting with all of them and you're becoming mindful because your mind is with them, right? So there are a number of ways to practice mindfulness. And meditation is a small part of mindfulness. And if you want to practice meditation, I know breathing meditation is very difficult, but it's not that difficult. It's like walking on a lawn, green lawn, over again and again for a number of days together. You form a path there. And you stop walking that path for a week or two, then the overgrowth will cover it again. But even if you walk once a day on that path, anytime, doesn't matter, that path will continue to exist. It's exactly the same here with our mindfulness and meditation as well. So practice of happiness, there are simple practices. One is connect yourself anywhere. You get into a classroom or you're going to teach in a classroom, just sit down and take a few deep breaths in. Close your eyes and take a few deep breaths in and follow your breath in and out. You're going to be calm. Walking anywhere, just try not to focus too far away, but don't judge anything. As you walk, appreciate on your way. Smile, just appreciate. Feel your foot as if you're kissing the Mother Earth, feel that and just walk. You are mindful, you are meditating. So the moment you try to bring yourself with yourself, in other words, your mind with your body, you are practicing mindfulness, and that's going to ultimately take you to happiness. Because why are you unhappy? Is because your mind is not with you. It's flying away all the time, either in the past or in the future. But the moment you're mindful, that means you are happy naturally. That's the simple connection that I would like to bring. There are several other mindfulness practices. You can connect your body sitting there. You can also wriggle your toes, say thank you to your toes for the contribution that it makes to your walking and feet and all that. Your soul, thank the soul. Ask these feet to relax. Talk about your ankle, say thank you to ankle. Continue that way onto the body. And if you have insomnia, sleeping problems, you can also sleep straight and start talking to your toes, thanking. But one thing you have to, after you thank the toes, ask them to be calm, every part of the body in that matter. One thing you will have to put is, my eyes are getting heavier, I'm falling asleep. That's the only addition. Otherwise, this practice can be done anywhere. And you don't need a lot of time to do it. 1 minute is more than enough. 2 minutes, more than enough for you. Okay? So, and that's one. So breathing. Then often people have problems with breathing. You can put verses. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. So put that and say, I have a smile on my face. Breathing out, I'm relaxed. So in, when you take your breath in, put the word smile in your face and you're smiling. And when you're breathing out slowly, say, I'm relaxed, and you're relaxing. You have to use those words in your mind. In breath, out breath, fresh, whatever you want to bring that change in yourself. If you want to be calm, smiling all the time, these are the 2 words you use in your meditation. As you walk down the corridor, just keep on saying, I'm smiling, I'm calm, I'm smiling, I'm calm. And if you practice, according to the research, they say if you do any one thing for 45 days, for 21 days, 45 minutes every day, you get a skill. You become skillful on it. So there you are. So simple practices like this, walking meditation. As you're walking down, always consider don't look too far. Just look maybe about 20 feet ahead of you. Try to enjoy what comes on your way. Be aware of it without judgment. But then feel your feet, movement of your feet on the ground. Okay? If you are too anxious, suddenly, one example I keep giving is you're driving to office, suddenly at the crossroad, there's a red light, and you're just 1 second late. You start to get, jittery, saying, oh God, if I was 1 second early, I could have crossed. Now I'll be late by 3 seconds or 3 minutes or whatever. But why don't you think the other way? Wow, universe gives me this time to breathe in, to connect with myself. By the time you arrive there, you'll be calm, you'll be much more peaceful, you'll be delivering things much, much better. And you might look slow. When you are a happy person, you might look slow. But the output that that person brings is tremendous, not comparable with others. It's also scientifically, research has proven this, not scientific. Research has proven this, that happy people produce more. So produce more not only in terms of work output, but in your own life and self. And then you can also use, prayers, chanting, for example. If you don't know the meaning of the chanting, you can as well put a meaning. And like, for example, I give this, beautiful name, Santushi Amarasuriya. Santushi, satisfaction or contentment. Amar is eternal, Surya is light. See? So she is eternally content. And if that name reflects in her mind, she's going to be that. That's what she will project all the time. This is called self-affirmation. Okay? When you do this, try to constantly prepare your self-affirmations, and I think I have 2 more slides or 3 more. So I'll quickly go forward. How much is time left? No time? Finished? End? All right. I'll quickly make it then. So finding challenges in happiness in challenging times. Like there was a beautiful example, people started to come together on the streets. That's what happened during the COVID. These are living examples. One of them is like people dying with COVID and they don't want to touch, so somebody comes and starts to cremate that person. So beautiful things happen, but there has to be this acceptance. There has to be this connection, feeling for others, compassion for others. Transformative power of a positive mindset, I can give you. In early 60s, there was a footballer who hurt his knee, wanted to play in the World Cup, but couldn't. And he was so depressed. After a while, he realizes little children playing in the outskirts with, cloth ball. And he starts to think about differently. So he buys balls, takes these children to play on the ground, and 2 of them become actually the World Cup players later. Anyway, almost concluding. So the key points is sufferance exists always with us, every time, everywhere, but there is a cause for sufferance. And there is also a way out for sufferance, and Buddha has prescribed the 8-fold paths. Of course, we come from different cultures, but if you look in those 8-fold paths, they are not religious, they are totally universal. Call for action, let me quickly tell you that when you wake up in the morning, what you do is sit down, push yourself against the bedpost, think about yesterday, how you passed yesterday, what were a few things that you could change if yesterday came back to you today, and think about today. Think in such a way what you're going to do, your plan and beyond the plan. If this happens, how would I behave? If that happens, how do I behave? Maybe you don't like somebody. If that person comes in front of you, how would you react? Prepare your journey. After that, you just listen to your breathing in and out and meditate for 3 minutes, not more, just that much. And as you run to the bathroom, put your self-affirmation, what you want to be, right there, and remind yourself constantly, and you'll become. There's nothing big in it. This is my final slide. Tashi dile shu. That means, may I take the permission to wish you auspiciousness, may you be happy and well, May you find happiness in whatever you do. May you bring happiness to the lives you touch, and may you be the northern star for yourself, your family, your community, and the world. If you want, we can sing this happiness song, which will ground us together. It'll not even 1 minute. I'll just go with it. You follow me, okay? I'll stop and you follow me. Happiness is here and now. Please. I have dropped my worries. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. And I'm not in a hurry. Happiness is here and now. I have dropped my worries. Somewhere to go, something to do. But I'm not in a hurry. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chetri, for those beautiful thoughts. And our faculty is also very pleased to be currently working on a certificate course on the science of happiness and meditation along with you and your colleagues at the Reiki Foundation in an attempt to work on strategies which are locally relevant and effective in fostering well-being. So, as we've been discussing during the morning, we have faced a lot of adversities and challenges. But let's once again hear some of the opinions and experiences of some of our local experts and scholars about the ability of the Sri Lankan population to deal with the challenges they have faced.
Because of many of the crises that Sri Lanka has been through in the past decades, people often comment on the collective resilience of its population. However, I think that in a country of over 20 million, it's impossible to reduce diverse historical experiences of very different groups to one simple narrative. I think there are many ways in which individuals, families, and communities have adapted quite effectively to major crises like war and disaster, or to sometimes more personal experiences of violence or incidents of injustice. And these have been in ways that have protected or recovered their well-being, or in some cases even led to positive growth. However, equally, I think it's important that we recognize that living through these very difficult experiences also has depleted and damaged some of their physical, psychological, social, spiritual, material resources, and has left vulnerabilities that may remain for many years and can even be passed down intergenerationally. And I think we need to be sensitive to how the legacy of these public and personal tragedies, both negative and positive, resides in our body politic, in our fellow citizens, and in the communities that exist around the country. And we need to take these into account when we plan policies and programs for them.
Yeah, I think we have a remarkable ability to bounce back and to cope. I think it's there with all populations, all societies. So in this instance also, I am confident that there be a lot of people will suffer, but at some stage we will turn around and we'll be able to overcome the adversities which we are facing.
As Sri Lankans, we are quite resilient. We have gone through many struggles over the years. And even as a psychiatrist, I do not see the extent of psychiatric disorders or even trauma-related outcomes as much as perhaps seen in Western countries in day-to-day life, because many people do have their own coping mechanism, including recourse to religious as well as social networks which help them deal with their problems.
People in Sri Lanka can overcome problems and difficulties, but to a certain extent. What they do is they prioritize what is most important to them at the expense sometimes of their mental health. The stress brought about by having to prioritize whether it is to feed their families, to educate their children, and this may lead to frustration and disappointment, and a need to completely think of their lives differently. They have to adjust to changes all the time, which is an indication of their ability to cope. But this need to have to cope is in itself very stressful and impacts one's mental well-being.
Looking back at our people, I see that they have just jumped from managing one challenge after the other. So in that sense, we could say superficially they seem resilient, but actually are they is a question. We do seem to be going from one challenge to another, but in that rush, are we actually growing? Because certain people do grow when they psychologically grow, when they encounter challenges. But whether that has actually happened to our population to a large degree, I don't think there's any research on that right now.
So we thought of sharing this last image as a part of this video because in a sense it represents the questions we ask in this segment of the program. When you see it, you may immediately feel happy because it is a beautiful image of a young child with a broad smile on her face. But as you take a closer look at the photograph, you will see that she is standing in a swamp. Her clothes are torn and her hair is matted, but she is still happy to hold the lotus flowers that she has picked. So does this picture represent our population? Are we able to survive despite adversity? Or maybe it's like the click of a camera, the smiles that you witness are momentary. Also, a different angle to consider is whether such adversities could help us to grow and prosper. To tell us a little bit more about what the research says on the relationship between adversity and growth, I now invite Professor Eranda Jayawickreme, the Harold W. Tribble Professor of Psychology and Senior Research Fellow at the Program for Leadership and Character of the Wake Forest University. His research delves into post-traumatic growth, moral personality, personality dynamics, and well-being. So over to you, Eranda.
Thanks to all of you. I know we're, I think, past time, and some of you might have other places to be. So if you feel like you need to leave, that's totally fine. I will not take it personally. It is wonderful to be here in Colombo. I was born in London to Sri Lankan parents and moved back to Sri Lanka when I was young. So I lived in Sri Lanka until 2001 when I left for my education. So it's, I've had the opportunity to come back fairly regularly to see my family, but it's been 4 years since my previous visit because of the COVID pandemic. So just to talk a little bit about the relevance of my research for the challenges that you all are facing in Sri Lanka right now. Some of my early research back when I was a graduate student focused on strategies of resilience and predictors of well-being among Sri Lankan Tamil civilians who were internally displaced by the civil war. And in terms of thinking about strategies that can foster resilience in the wake of significant life challenges, traumatic life challenges like the Sri Lankan Civil War, a lot of what we found in our research mirrored those that Gamila and Ananda, who are colleagues and friends I've known for more than 15 years, discussed in the video that you saw earlier before Saamdu's lecture. In particular, in the research that we found that engage in community activities and maintaining community status, performing religious rituals, and maintaining religious faith
And oh, I'm blanking. Oh yeah, and having good relationships, and also to some extent focusing on personal self-development. These were all seen as predictors of resilience. That said, the number one predictor of well-being and functioning was the ability to successfully fulfill basic needs for you and your family, right? So while my interest was understanding psychological predictors of resilience, it's worth keeping in mind, especially for people who are marginalized, who live in poverty, the number one predictor of resilience is having access to basic resources. So my early research looked at well-being and resilience in the context of the Sri Lankan Civil War. In more recent years, I've done a lot of research on the three topics that are the focus of today's conference. So I have a long-time research program in morality, understood in terms of personality traits, because I'm a personality psychologist. I'm very interested in traits associated with good thinking. So Igor and I have a shared interest in wisdom. And I've also done a lot of research, and this is what I'll be talking about today, about this idea that adversity, trauma, suffering can in some ways be a gift. Now, this might seem surprising to many of us who think that, bad things are called bad things for a reason, right? So why should we expect them to give us something good or something positive? But there's this idea that's especially pervasive in certain cultures, particularly in the US, that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now, some of you might recognize that quote from the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, who's a German philosopher. Some of you might recognize it from a pop song by Kelly Clarkson. But this idea is that sometimes going through adversity and trauma can be good for us because it gives us something that we wouldn't have had otherwise without having gone through the adverse event. Now, in talking about my research on what is called post-traumatic growth, which Piranjali and Ananda briefly mentioned in the video you just watched, I'm going to present 4 ideas. The first idea here is these ideas will hopefully give you some tools, some ideas that you can potentially apply in your own life. So the first idea I want to present here is the notion that if you want to think about the possibility that adversity and failure and trauma can impact us and transform us, we need to think in a complex, broad way about what it means to be transformed. Now, this idea that adversity can be good for us has a long history in philosophical and religious thought, right? So some of you may know the writings of Maya Angelou. She was a professor at Wake Forest for many years. She also wrote a number of very famous books, including I Know How the Caged Bird Sings. So she has a quote, it may be necessary to encounter the defeat so that you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. So this idea that going through adversity is important and necessary for your personality development is one that has a long history. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, spoke about this explicitly when he said that you need to have your character pushed up against by life in order for you to reach the summits of good character. More recently, my colleague and friend Valerie Tiberius has written about this idea of adversity as a key predictor, a key mechanism for achieving good character and well-being, right? So this is what religious scholars and philosophers have argued for. Now, I've mentioned religion, right, both in the context of talking about the coping strategies of Sri Lankan war survivors and in the context of this idea that adversity can be good for you. This idea that adversity can strengthen you, transform you, is a key idea discussed in multiple religious traditions. Indeed, in the last few years, there have been a number of books that have come out by scholars from very different persuasions. So John Gray is a British public philosopher, David Hiseno is a social psychologist, David Volpe is a rabbi who came to prominence in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. Despite their different backgrounds, they all agree, or they all argue, that the fundamental role of religion isn't necessarily to give you a set of rules for how to live your life, or to tell you what is good or what is bad. The central role in religion is instead to help you understand what might seem ununderstandable, right? Like the idea that we're all corporeal beings that only have a limited time on earth, that the people we love are going to get sick and at some point die, that at some point we are aware of the fact that we will die, right? These are all big questions that we may not necessarily have the idea to. Sorry, we may not necessarily have the answer to. And this is where religion comes in, right? So religion comes in to help us understand these questions that may cause us to suffer. Now, I am not a religious scholar. My family background is Buddhism and Christianity, so I'll just give a couple of examples from those two religious perspectives. A few years ago, we organized a meeting about adversity and wisdom in New York, and the philosopher of religion, Emily McRae, argued that from a Buddhist perspective, understanding what she called an ultimate truth, and this is very similar to what Saamdu mentioned in a meeting we had yesterday, understanding that life is fundamentally about suffering can liberate you and allow you to develop specific personality traits or character traits that you would not otherwise be able to develop. So these are examples of the 6 perfections in Mahayana Buddhism. Once you are able to understand the essential truth of suffering, you are able to potentially develop in patience, wisdom, generosity, and these other personality traits. So this is one idea from Buddhist philosophy. In Christianity, there's this whole area of work in theology called theodicy, which it tries to understand how a loving God would allow suffering in this world. One argument that's been presented is that suffering helps us understand something important about our own existence. Specifically, that we are vulnerable, dependent human beings who need help from others and maybe from God. Right? So to the extent to which you believe that you're an autonomous agent who has power over your own life and agency to do what you want, suffering reminds you that in fact you're not that type of person, right? Like all of us, you are going to suffer, you're going to live only for a certain period of time, and you're going to need the help of others. Now, in philosophy, there's been a recent discussion about how certain types of experiences can be transformative. So the philosopher Laurie Paul, who's at Yale now, she's written about how going through certain experiences, and she's talking broadly here, not about trauma specifically, can change you in meaningful ways, even though you may not know necessarily beforehand how that experience is going to change you. So just from a personal level, the experience of becoming a parent in the last few years has been a transformative experience. Now, we'll talk later on whether those types of individual experiences can be generalized, but those are the types of experiences that Paul is thinking of. Now, in some of my own works, I've collaborated with some philosophers in the virtue ethics tradition on what types of character traits or personality traits may develop in the wake of adversity. So my colleague Michael Brady, who's at the University of Glasgow, has taken a virtue ethics position and has argued that there might be certain personality traits that you can't develop without having gone through adversity. So for example, you may not know that you possess fortitude until you've been in a situation or context where you get to show or manifest that fortitude. So these are the reason why I want to give you a brief overview of how philosophers and religious thinkers think about the potential value of adversity is I want to contrast that in a few minutes with the way that many psychologists have thought about the potential benefits of adversity. So when psychologists think about the benefits of adversity, they typically think about the ways in which people are able to make sense of their lives and potentially even find silver linings, right, in the wake of going through a life crisis or tragedy. So this is a quote from a book by Hamilton Jordan. He was the chief of staff for Jimmy Carter, who was a former US president. And in later life, he sort of became well known for going through multiple bouts with cancer. And he wrote very publicly about it during the time where people usually didn't disclose what I call information about their health. So in this book, he talks about how by going through his health struggles, he actually, his experience of the world changed in meaningful ways. So he talks about how he appreciates the small things in life. He talks about how much he appreciated spending time with his family. And then he also spoke about how he experienced a sense of gratitude. Now, many of you might look at this example and think, well, that's an example of growth, potentially. And maybe it is true, right, that after going through hardship or life challenge, that these benefits can be accrued pretty easily. So this leads to my second point, which is that even though religious thinkers and philosophers have argued that there are potential benefits to adversity, that it can have a transformative effect, we actually don't know the extent to which people are able to reap these benefits or the time course over which these benefits become visible. Now, over the last 15 years or so, people have become increasingly interested, especially in the United States, in this idea that adversity can lead to positive outcomes. In the mid to late 1990s, a number of different researchers around the world simultaneously started doing research on this idea that there could be benefits to adversity. So Crystal Parker at University of Connecticut, Stephen Joseph at University of Nottingham, Pat Frazier at University of Minnesota, all started doing research at around the same time on this question of benefits for an adversity. But the definition that's most widely used in the psychology literature now was coined by two clinical psychologists at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, Richard Eskin and Lawrence Calhoun, and they defined the term post-traumatic growth, which is the experience of positive psychological change as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances. And in their view, going through adversity, going through trauma, has a transformative effect on the individual. And they distinguish this from resilience. Right? So this is a quote from a psychological inquiry paper that they published back in the late 90s. Post-traumatic growth then has a quality of transformation or a qualitative change in functioning, unlike the apparently similar concepts of resilience, sense of coherence, optimism, and hardiness. So this is an idea that has a great deal of resonance, or had a great deal of resonance, especially in the US. And a lot of my work has focused on trying to question what I call these assumptions, in part because when looking at the research literature, it becomes increasingly unclear what exactly people's reports of post-traumatic growth actually mean. And so, so I've been doing this work now for 15 years, and until maybe 4 years ago, I would publish my work. Some people were interested. Occasionally, I get an email from like a fellow researcher. But the media or people at large weren't super interested in it. And then the COVID pandemic came. And I will say that in the last 3 years or so, people have become a lot more interested in the idea of post-traumatic growth. So this is just one example. This is a profile that I did that was done for me for the BBC. I think one reason why this work has become more interesting to people is because in the wake of the COVID pandemic, people were expecting some degree of change. They were expecting some degree of growth. And maybe for many people, that growth didn't come to pass. They needed an explanation for it. But anyway, I mentioned earlier that when you look at the research in post-traumatic growth, it becomes less clear what people's responses actually mean. And the reason why is the way in which we assess post-traumatic growth. Now, these are the instructions for the measure that's most widely used to assess post-traumatic growth. It measures 5 domains of growth: greater appreciation of life, new possibilities, personal strength, religious faith, and increased relationships. And here's one item for each of those domains. Now, I would like you all to take a minute. Look at these items. Think about how much you have grown as a result of the most recent life challenge you've gone through. Think about the most recent life challenge you've gone through, and take a moment. And then, in your mind, think of a number for how much you've grown from 1 to 5. Now, you can see that this is intuitively very face-value way of asking about people's experience of growth, right? It's like the way a friend or a therapist or counselor could ask you, how much have you grown following that stressful life event? Now, the problem is, from a measurement perspective, if you want to have people give accurate responses to a measure like this, they need to successfully complete these steps. So we call this in psychometrics response process validity. Are people going through the steps you need them to go through in order to give you a valid response? So you need someone to think about how they're doing right now on a particular domain. How they were doing before the adverse event. How does it compare? Did I change for the better or for the worse? If I change for the better or for the worse, how much did I change? Did I change on a 2 or on a 3 out of 5-point scale? And then once you identified how much you think you've changed, you need to then figure out how much of that change is due to the trauma. So there are these two problems here. One is that we're not very good at remembering our past self. There's a lot of good research suggestion that we actively downgrade our past self because we want to believe that we're constantly growing as people. So we're actually not very good at accurately identifying what our past personality was like. But in addition, we are not very good, in some cases, it may not be even clear that we can figure out how much of my change is due to the trauma. Right? Maybe over time, when we look back, we might be able to do that, but it's not clear, especially in the immediate aftermath of going through a traumatic event, that we have that ability. So, I know I don't have very much time, so I'm going to very quickly go through some evidence that our lab has done, suggesting that these measures of growth may not be super valid. We did one study among people in North Carolina who had gone through a serious clinical trauma. We had them come in and take this measure, and we had people who were close to them come and fill out an informed version of the measure. So if I reported my level of post-traumatic growth, my wife, my friend, my brother would report on my level of post-traumatic growth. And then we looked at the level of corroboration. And we looked at the level of corroboration in a number of different ways. For now, we'll just say that when we looked at both the extent to which targets and informants agreed, so the extent to which my wife and I agreed on my post-traumatic growth, it was very, very low. The correlation was not significant. We did a similar study looking at Sri Lankan Tamil survivors of the Civil War. We had pairs of survivors come in, and they rated each other in post-traumatic growth. Again, if you look, the number you need to look at is in the center. Having pairs come in allowed us to do some cool analysis, which we won't get into here. But again, the correlation here, it was significant here, but it was still small. The figure on the right is, we also had people fill out a measure of post-traumatic negative change or depreciation. But I won't get into those results right now. But interestingly, at least in US samples, targets and observers actually agree on negative change more than positive change. And I can go into the reasons in the Q&A. We also did an experienced sampling study where we had all the undergraduate students at Wake Forest University enrolled in a study. We tracked them over the course of an academic year. And whenever a student reported a major life event or traumatic event, we assessed their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors 5 times a day for 3 weeks. And then we looked to see whether their reports of how much they had changed matched their daily manifestations of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors relevant to that domain of post-traumatic growth. And what we found was that, with the exception of spirituality, people's beliefs about change did not match up with their day-to-day behaviors. Now, you might think, well, fine, you believe you've grown, but you haven't grown. It might be that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy happening, right? Where if you fake it, you'll make it at some point. If you believe you've grown, maybe over time, you'll start enacting real change. So we tested this in a year-long study with 4 waves. We had a large sample. We looked at the relationship between believing you've changed and actual change, both assessed through trait measures and through a sampling of people's everyday thoughts, feelings, and behaviors aggregated at each time point. And across those assessments, we did not find evidence that believing that you had changed actually led to meaningful change going forward. So this raises the question of what the value of a measure like post-traumatic growth is, right? When people are responding to this measure, what information are they telling us? Well, maybe for some people, when they tell us they've grown, they actually have grown. It's possible. It could be that when people have told you that they've grown, they're still coping with the stressful life event. We know from the coping literature that one way in which you can self-regulate your response to adversity so that you can make the negative feelings you have around the event go down, and also maybe establish some degree of control over the event, is by positively reframing the event. So you can positively reframe the event and think in terms of thinking about, well, this terrible thing happened, but at least I have my friends and family, or at least I have my religious faith. So when people tell you they've grown, it actually might be a coping strategy rather than any meaningful change. It's also possible that when people tell you they've grown, they're just talking, they're just using a cultural script, right? So when they tell you they've grown, it's not that they've actually grown. It's because in a given culture, like in the US, the way in which you're supposed to talk about adversity is in terms of growth. or in terms of overcoming and becoming stronger, right? The fact that superhero movies are so popular in the United States and around the world, right, speaks to this idea that when you are confronted with trauma, one way in which you should respond to it is by growing. Finally, people who report growth may not have come to terms with the fact that they have been negatively impacted by it. Some of you may have gone through a romantic breakup, and then in the immediate aftermath you think, oh, this is great, I'm not affected at all, I'm going to learn from this, I'm going to, become better than ever. And then after a few weeks, it hits you. Right? So it might be that when people go through, when people report growth, they may not have come to terms or reckoned with the impact of the adversity. So, moving very quickly, because I know I'm short on time, there's this interesting issue in the psychology literature where while post-traumatic growth has been defined in terms of changes in your personality, it's been assessed in terms of people's perceived beliefs. So in some of the work that I've done, I've tried very hard to reconceptualize post-traumatic growth as personality change and think through some of the best ways to assess this. So this is a process model that I worked on with my colleague Cornelia Frus at Heidelberg, University of Heidelberg in Germany, and Nick Westrate, who's at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And we tested this in an intensive longitudinal study where we had a large number of people, around 1,000 people. We assessed them every week for 1 year. So it was 45 weeks of assessments because we didn't assess them on major holidays. We have a number of papers that have come out of this project. I'll just mention one thing, which is that if you track people's weekly post-traumatic growth across the year, and you examine whether their levels of post-traumatic growth actually shifts upwards in the wake of going through a major life event, and we had some people go through multiple life events, so we looked at both their shift in PTG at the first event they experienced and then across all events. On average, you find stability. So you find evidence, on average, in the immediate aftermath of adversity, of resilience, not of growth. Now, the reason why this is surprising is if you take the post-traumatic growth literature at face value, and you use a measure like the post-traumatic growth inventory, you'll have findings like this. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, in a sample of Canadian healthcare workers, 77% of people reported high levels of post-traumatic growth in the immediate aftermath of being exposed to the pandemic. Now, as part of my work on this, we also were lucky to get a large grant to fund multiple projects to examine this question of post-traumatic growth. This was a Pathways to Character project. My colleague Frank Inferna at Arizona State University and I at Arizona State University, we worked together on giving out $3.4 million to multiple research groups to study the impact of adversity on people's personality. Now, as I said, I'm interested in both morality and in wisdom. We had researchers do work on changes in morality. These are assessments for gratitude, life satisfaction, compassion, generativity, and religiosity/spirituality. On average, so you can see there's a fair bit of variability if you look at individuals. Those are the black lines. But on average, you did not see evidence of change. We also had researchers look at intellectual traits. This is my colleague and friend Mary Froja. She tracked people's open-mindedness over the course of a year. And again, she found evidence of stability. I wasn't sure what Igor was going to talk about, but Igor also was funded by this project, and he found similar results with regards to wise reasoning. Now, one caveat here is that if you track people over a longer period of time, and then ask them about the life event that has impacted them the most, people might actually have some insight about which event has impacted them. Ted Schwaber, who's an amazing young personality psychologist, had a paper come out recently in JPSP, which is one of the leading journals in social personality psychology, where he tracked people in the Netherlands over 10 years, and at the end of 10 years, he had them report what the most impactful life event over the last 10 years was. And then he went back and looked at their personality, and he was using the big 5 personality traits, so general personality traits. And he looked at the extent to which they change in the wake of going through that major life event. And he found for at least some personality traits, like emotional stability and agreeableness, that people subject to appraisal of these life events actually matched up with personality change. Now, some of this change was negative. But this means two things, that maybe if you give people time, they do have some insight into what events have shaped them, but also it means that in the immediate aftermath, it might be too much for us to expect growth. So, how can we do better research in post-traumatic growth? I'm going to go through these very quickly. I think the term growth implies that we're somehow better than before. And I think one lesson we can take from Ananda's points in the video earlier is that people's response to trauma is more complex. We can change in some ways for the better. We might become more compassionate towards other people, but we can also change for the worse at the same time. Some of us might struggle to fulfill our responsibilities to our immediate family. So I think we need to challenge simplistic narratives of redemption and transformation. I think expecting transformation in the wake of adversity is probably too high a bar for most of us. A lot of the research on post-traumatic growth has been done looking at Western populations. We need better research to understand whether people talk about growth as a meaningful outcome for an adversity, and if so, what domains those are, among other contexts. We've done some of this work in Rwanda. Also, we have done a very bad job of figuring out what are the key characteristics of life events that can spur change within us. So a lot of the work that I've reported focused on people who have gone through traumatic life events. Now, it might be that many of the people who are struggling in Sri Lanka right now, even though their struggles are quite meaningful, you know, we may not rate their experience as a traumatic event. In addition, and this is another point, another insightful point that Ananda mentioned in his talk, it's simplistic to say that you go through one event and then you change for the better or the worse, right? One event probably leads to other stressful life events. And then there's the daily challenges you face from those life events. There are many Sri Lankans who have gone through multiple challenges, right? There were people living in Batacala who were in fact impacted by the civil war, they were impacted by the tsunami. Now they're, you know, maybe their children or their grandchildren have been impacted by the economic crisis. So we need a much more nuanced understanding of how multiple life events work together to impact our personality. And I will note that this is challenging work because I'm not the first person to make this critique. There were researchers making this critique of post-traumatic growth back in the late 1990s. But I think one reason why this research has persisted is that we all believe that it's comforting to entertain the idea of growth from adversity. In fact, many of us, when we think about our own lives, probably think about our lives in terms of, I was a certain person, then this event happened, it challenged me, but I came out better than before. So as scientists, one of the challenges we face when we do research that there's certain ideas that we may not challenge because they already feel intuitively true to us. So I had 4 ideas I'm going to present to you. I know I'm out of time, so I'm just going to very quickly go through the previous 2. And this is my attempt, in light of some of the questions that I received from Santushi, of providing some key tools to people that can help them in their daily life, right? So, you know, one line of research I have is looking at ways in which, when we're confronted by adversity, how affirming our values can help us cope and ultimately move on from adversity and trauma. So a few years ago, I worked with some from colleagues and dear friends of mine who are clinical psychologists on intervention, right, that we call second story. And this intervention was for people who self-selected into the study, who had gone through bereavement. And what we did is that we had multiple modules, which included a self-affirmation module that would help them reframe and move on from adversity. And what we found was that at least in the short term, right, this is the 3-month follow-up, compared to people who were in the control condition, there was a small impact of the intervention on depression. Now, this was a very moderate effect, and also over time it dissipated. So we're currently developing a new version of intervention that includes multiple boosters, but also new content that we hope will strengthen the long-term effect of the intervention. So one idea we have is including role models, right? People that we know or people that society might venerate as exemplars of how to go through adversity and trauma. So when you think about figures like Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, right? These are people who undergone intense struggle, intense suffering, but have come out maybe for the better out of it. So the idea here is that thinking about exemplars might make you feel like, okay, if this person can do it, maybe I can do it. It also might complicate your understanding of how you should respond to adversity. So if you think that when you go through adversity, the only pathway is downhill, seeing an exemplar can maybe help you think, well, maybe that's not the only path. Maybe there are other ways in which I can respond, and that can be motivating. There's an interesting paper that was published earlier this year from Kurt Gray's lab at UNC Chapel Hill, where he argued that to the extent to which people saw their own lives in terms of exemplars, right? So if you see your life as characterized by a hero's journey, so these, this is an idea taken from the ancient Roman epics, where you're on a quest, you make allies, you then are confronted by challenges, you overcome the challenge, you learn something from it, and then you leave a legacy, right? So this idea of being a hero seems to lead to greater meaning in life, at least among US participants. Now, I want to say that even the exemplars can be helpful by showing you that there are multiple pathways for an adversity. It's also true that not all of us can be like Nelson Mandela, right? You can imagine someone telling you that, oh, Gandhi got through so much worse than you, right? So you can deal with this. You might think, well, not only am I supposed to deal with this, this horrible event and figure out how I can lessen its impact on me, I now have to be like Gandhi as well, right? So the challenge is when we take exemplars and we think, well, the lesson here is everyone can be like Gandhi. So I think there's a sense that we have to be mindful about the ways in which we engage with exemplars. And one solution might be not to engage with historical figures, but maybe with people we know in our own lives. Right? So that's another tool that we can use. So these are the 4 ideas that are presented in this talk. Thank you so much for staying. I know we're 40 minutes past the scheduled end time. I want to thank my funders. I want to also say that I have 2 young kids, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And when I told my son that I was coming here for a talk and I wouldn't be at home for 10 days, he asked me whether he could be in the talk. So here he is with his sister, Maya. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Eranda. We now go into our Q&A session. Our plan was initially to ask the 5 speakers to come back up here, but just to save time, do you mind taking questions from there? Maybe just a few. That's fine. Just sit down and you can stand up if the question is directed to you. If we have the mics moving around, if you have any questions, please do raise your hand. We have one question here. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have rather 2 questions. One is now on conflict resolution. Now, how can we resolve the present ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestine? That's one. And the other one is the Faculty of Medicine has organized wisdom, morality, and well-being. Now, when you talk about well-being, we find that there's a migration of medical practitioners from Sri Lanka. So that will affect the well-being of the citizens of Sri Lanka. So how ethical it is for the medical practitioners to migrate?
Okay, so 2 very big questions, might be very difficult to answer. Just some ideas. The one on conflict, Melody, do you want to?
So I guess this is a very big question. So if we have a solution that we can answer in 5 minutes, I think we can resolve all the problem in the world. So I think this is not easy questions. And in fact, even in the last 2 days in our workshop, we do have colleagues that come from the regions that you mentioned. This is, yes, we don't have a quick solution to that. And I think the situation is that if going back to what we talk about, if each of the party are insisting, trying to think about trying to resolve it in their own way, it can be very difficult. So I think now what we see is that there are some attempts to try to have a third party step in trying to mediate the conflicts. But I think sometimes the solution does not come in a minute. It does not come in 2 seconds that, while we are talking about this. I think it needs time to really sort things out. Yeah, so I think this is actually a very big question. Not sure if anyone here have like a quick solution to that. So anyone else want to?
Okay, so the second one, I wonder whether anyone wants to address it or any.
Could you repeat the question? I know it had to do with people, medical professionals leaving.
might be a tough one? From a point of view of morality, okay?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting, important question. I mean, I'm not sure that there can be a right answer. I think it's the sort of thing that we have to think about the consequences and also think about potentially obligations to one's community. I would say that depending on the different ethical framework that we have, we might respond differently. But the key thing would be for someone to do that in a way that is true to their values is the only thing I would say. And that's all we can perhaps really ask for, that someone who is doing that is making a wise decision, engaging in wise reasoning and thinking through the different options. And if that is the most valuable thing, then at an individual level, I think that's someone's personal decision.
Okay. Any other questions? Any burning questions? Okay. Okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah, it's very interesting to actually be part of this session today. We rarely talk about wisdom, morality, and well-being. So my question is actually looking at well-being, overall well-being of people. How can we guarantee overall well-being? Is it a social justice approach? I mean, we didn't hear about rights today. There was no discussion about rights of people guaranteeing, let's say, for example, some of the colleagues mentioned about material well-being, let's say, having access to economic assets, etc. So we all want to perceive well-being, but how rights is going to have a role in this? That's my question number one. Question number two, talking about post-traumatic growth and adversity-activated development. Now, in refugee studies, we talk about a thing called adversity-activated development. Migrants, refugees on the move, they move and they actually learn from the journey and then they become somebody. So, why I'm asking this question is because if you look at humanity and human beings, I think we are on the path of survive. So I should try to kind of tend to maneuver the difficulties we have and we survive. But the question is resilience, how we can guarantee some kind of resilience to push, how do you call it, to come out of the misery that they have faced. So is there a model that has been discussed towards well-being? These are two questions, I don't know.
I'll try and answer both of them. I think we'll see if I can answer them to your satisfaction. So I think your point about rights is a good one. And I think it's something that we need to keep in mind when we think about how Sri Lanka and how people here can move past the challenges we face, is that we recognize that these challenges don't happen in a vacuum, right? So at the beginning of the first video, right, we saw this history of the different events that Sri Lanka has gone through since the 1980s. And it's worth keeping in mind, right, that going back to your point on rights, that a lot of the challenges we're facing now is a function of decisions we made way before the 1980s, right? So the move away from a multi-religious, multi-ethnic polity in the 1950s, right, with the decisions made by voters and the government. The riots that started from 58 onwards, right? The lack of economic opportunities for people in different parts of the country that led to the insurrection in 71 and again in 89, right? The challenges faced by minority communities in this country that led to the long Civil War. So I think it's important to keep in mind that when we face up to this question of how we can maintain well-being and improve the lives of people in this country, that we need to keep in mind that the problems we're facing now have a history, right? And going back to your point, I think one thing we need to do is think about the long term, right? That is not just about, if we can get short-term assistance to boost our economy, everything's going to be okay, right? In some ways, and maybe this was the case for many of you in the immediate aftermath of the Aragallia, right? That there was this brief hope that there would be a reset, right? Which didn't come to pass for a number of reasons. But I think, hopefully, going back to what Igor mentioned in his talk, there'll be wisdom, there'll be consideration of other people's multiple perspectives, there'll be, this focus not only in the immediate term, but on the long term, a careful consideration that other people have meaningful points of view, even though you might disagree with them, We can only hope that the voters and the leaders, right, will have those characteristics, because I do think centering rights, right, of all Sri Lankans, that's going to be critical for this country to get out of its challenges. Your second question I'll answer quickly. I'll answer it this way. A lot of the work that is popular now in psychology around dealing with adversity focuses on the idea of transformation. But there's an alternate view, which is like stress inoculation. So the idea is that when you go through some type of challenge, you learn something from it, right? You learn how to address future challenges in a more effective way, and then you move on, right? Which I think is a much more plausible model of how people can adaptively respond to adversity. We do need to do more research about what types of life events we learn from the most easily, because as I mentioned in my talk, we conflate all these different types of life events together. But I think a model like that would be most appropriate for the work that you're doing.
Okay, so I just saw just one last question because we saw a hand up. So if you can just quickly.
Yeah, my first question is for Melody. We talk about managing conflict, ensuring that it doesn't escalate. But if you look at a conflict and deconstruct that, I feel that it's all about how people see the world, their worldview, how they see a situation. But if we allow that to continue, won't it actually evolve into something that we see the world collectively in a different way, and as a result, something good comes out of it? Rather than controlling it, rather than trying to control its escalation, but allowing it to kind of evolve so that collectively we see the world differently and society benefits as a result. Can we look at conflict in that manner? That's my question.
So I think this is a very, very important question. And I think actually I'm in agreement with you that when we talk about avoiding conflict escalation, it's not about silencing people, not talking about the different views. It's more about enabling people to talk to each other. Maybe, first of all, to do that, it's more about we need to start off with agreeing to disagree with each other. So I think that speaks to your point about how we allow people to really share their views. But not in a confrontational manner. So it's about providing people with a safe environment where they can share the perspective. So it's similar to what we also talk about in the talk, in the sense that by allowing the disputant share the perspective, we are not saying that we have to buy in one side or the other. It's not about who is right or who is wrong, but it's about really hearing the other perspective. And then from there, like what you're saying is consistent with what you say, is that based on hearing the different perspectives, then we might start to realize that maybe there's some commonality there that we can learn. Maybe there's some aspect of the picture that each side might be missing. And eventually, we can try to think about, kind of like what Eranda just now mentioned, it's about moving on, thinking about the future. Because I think a lot of time when people encounter conflict, usually there is history, there were the past. People tend to focus on the past, about what had happened and how they feel now. And an important part is also about looking into the future. So I think I'm in complete agreement with you that it's not about kind of suppressing it, but it's more about allowing the possibility that there are potentially conflicting views, but not kind of trying to manage them in the sense that not letting them just escalate into more emotional, intense conflict, but trying to build on the differences. Yeah, so hopefully that answer your questions.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think we need to wrap up. I do hope that many of your questions that you posed during registration did get answered during the session. So before we conclude, I would like to thank a few people. But first, this event was originally planned, or related events were originally planned in 2019, but due to the series of setbacks that the country faced, we had to postpone it numerous times before we finally pushed forward this year as part of a much smaller scale Wisdom Summit. Our grateful thanks to our funders for their understanding, patience, and support, which allowed us to materialize at least some of the plans that we conceived nearly 5 years ago. So our grateful thanks to the Templeton World Charity Foundation. Our grateful thanks to all our speakers today, Professor Igor Grossmann, Professor Melody Chao, Dr. Jim Everett, Professor Saamdu Chetri, and Professor Eranda Jayawickreme for their very informative presentations, which I'm sure will lead to much reflection and deliberation. Thank you also to Dr. Ramila Usoof and Professor Panduka Karunanayake for being discussants in the morality segment and for contributing your expertise to this discussion. A big thank you to our experts who contributed to the video you viewed on the well-being segment. They were all very forthcoming and accommodating of this program when I proposed, making videos for it, and I thank them for also being a sounding board in its design. I'm thankful to our Dean, Professor Bajira Disanayake, our Senior Assistant Bursa, Mrs. Himani Rajapaksa, and the Deputy Registrar, Mr. Bandrara, for the logistical support. Thank you to our actors, Anju Premavardhana and Chaturanga Hapuarachi, for volunteering to help us in the wisdom segment. We also thank the AV team, the AV and sound team, and my department staff. Also, a special thank you to Vayangana Silvat for helping us despite being on holiday in Sri Lanka. And also a big thank you to our audience today for your engagement in the event and for making it a success. I have left for the very last a very special group of people to thank. My very special thank you goes out to the golden team of this event, my research assistants, Ms. Varuni Fernando, Mr. Oshada Pereira, and Mr. Thilina Dammage. They have really been the backbone in organizing this event, being involved in a multitude of tasks from video recording and editing to script writing to designing material and even handling travel logistics and financial procedures. So we have been through a lot of challenges along the way, and their can-do attitude has always been a very, very great strength. I think they are hidden somewhere around. So some have been backstage and Thilina is seated there. So thank you very much. So with that, we come to the end of today's program. I do hope that you had a thought-provoking day, and I thank you once again for your presence. Thank you very much.